Tonight, we're uncovering the hidden pattern behind every Pokémon region. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. When you first step out of your house in Pallet Town, or Littleroot, or Twinleaf, the world feels vast, disorganized and wonderfully overwhelming. To a 10-year-old protagonist, it is simply a map of grass, water and mountains waiting to be conquered. But if you pull back the camera and look at the nearly 30 years of geography that make up the Pokémon world, a startling realization begins to take shape. These regions were never just random collections of towns and routes designed to facilitate a game. They were never just backdrops for a collection of monsters. Instead, every single region in the Pokémon franchise is a carefully constructed thesis, statement. Each map is a physical manifestation of a singular, driving idea, a philosophical question about what the relationship between humans, nature, and Pokémon actually represents. There is a rhythm to the way this world was built, a heartbeat that has moved from the simple, grounded urbanity of the 90s into the cosmic, mythological, and culturally dense landscapes of the modern era. We often think of the transition from Kanto to Paldea as a linear progression of technology, moving from simple pixels to vast open worlds. But the true evolution is much deeper. It is an evolution of identity. The pattern reveals that as the series grew, the developers stopped asking where a Pokémon lives and started asking why a Pokémon exists in that specific corner of the world. Think about the silence of the Johto peaks versus the industrial roar of the Galar stadiums. Think about the way the tropical humidity of Alola dictates the very biology of the creatures who live there, compared to the rigid, classic structure of the Kanto gyms. There is a hidden architecture at play here. When you look at the map of Hoenn, you aren't just looking at a region with too much water. You are looking at a battleground of environmental balance. When you look at Sinnoh, you aren't just looking at a snowy mountainous trek. You are looking at the literal birthplace of time and space, designed to feel heavy with the weight of eternity. The stakes of understanding this pattern are higher than they might seem at first glance. For decades, we have treated these regions as separate islands of content, but they are actually chapters in a grand, unfolding narrative about our own world's transition into the 21st century. The shift from Japanese-inspired settings to global ones. New York, France, Hawaii, the United Kingdom, Spain, isn't just a marketing tactic to appeal to international audiences. It is a deliberate broadening of the Pokémon mythos, an attempt to prove that the bond between trainer and partner is a universal human constant, regardless of the soil beneath their feet. But why does this pattern exist? Why did the creators feel the need to move away from the simple, effective loop of the first generation? In the beginning, Kanto was about the mechanics. It was about the Pokédex, the 8 badges, and the dream of being the very best. It was a blank slate. But as the years passed, the world needed a soul. It needed history. It needed a reason for the legendaries to stay hidden in their caves, and a reason for the villainous teams to rise up and challenge the status quo. The mystery lies in the transition points. Why did the series suddenly pivot from the traditional, folklore-heavy atmosphere of Johto to the high-concept, ecological drama of Hoenn? Why did Unova deliberately sever its ties to everything that came before it, forcing players to engage with an entirely new ecosystem before they could see a single familiar face? There is a logic to these shifts, a hidden hand guiding the way the world expands. We are looking for the common thread that connects a small village in the shadow of a volcano to a glittering metropolis powered by infinite energy. Tonight we are going to trace that thread. We are going to walk through every forest, climb every mountain, and surf across every sea to see how these regions fit together into a single cohesive vision. We are going to explore how the geography shapes the lore, how the lore shapes the Pokémon, and how the Pokémon, in turn, define the very essence of the land they inhabit. We will see how the series moved from simple routes to complex, culturally coded ecosystems that challenge our understanding of what this world is supposed to be. This is not just a tour of a map, it is a journey through the evolution of a universe. From the foundation of the original 151 to the sprawling, open frontiers of the present day, we are uncovering the grand design. As we move through the history of these lands, from the traditional rooftops of Ecological City to the neon lights of Castelia and beyond, Pay close attention to the way the air seems to change. Notice how the music shifts from the adventurous brass of the early years to the cinematic, atmospheric scores of the later generations. Everything is connected. Every mountain range is a barrier, every river is a bridge, and every region is a piece of a puzzle that we are finally ready to solve. Let us begin at the very beginning, on the shores of a world that was just starting to find its voice, and see where the pattern leads us. There is a hidden pattern that binds every Pokémon region together, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. It is not about the number of gyms or the placement of tall grass. It is not about which legendary bird appears on which route. It is something far deeper, a thread that runs from the pixelated grids of Kanto to the sun-drenched shores of Paldea. Each region is a thesis statement about what that generation wanted Pokémon to mean. And the most remarkable thing is that the games themselves never say this aloud. The pattern is buried in the geography, in the way the land shapes the story, in the quiet decisions that turn a simple map into a living, breathing argument about the world. Think back to the very beginning. In 1996, Pokémon Red and Green launched in Japan with a region that looked like a simplified version of the real Kanto area of Japan. The map was functional. It existed to serve the mechanics. You started in Pallet Town, followed a linear path through Viridian Forest, collected badges, and eventually reached the Pokémon League. But even then, something was happening beneath the surface. The map was already telling a story. Lavender Town was not just a stop on the route, it was a place of mourning, a graveyard for Pokémon. The power plant was not just a dungeon, it was the hiding place of a legendary creation. The geography taught you that this world had history, even if the pixels could only show a few colours. That was the seed. Over the next 20 years, the regions grew from simple 8-bit routes into complex, culturally coded ecosystems. Each new generation took the basic formula and bent it toward a different purpose. Johto arrived in 1999 and wrapped itself in tradition, with ancient towers and a sense that time was layered. Hoenn came next, and its vast ocean and shifting weather systems made ecology the central theme. Then Sinnoh placed a giant mountain at its centre and told a story of creation myth and the birth of the universe. The map was no longer just a backdrop for catching creatures. It had become the narrator. This is the shift that defines the hidden pattern. The early regions were about establishing the rules of the game. The later regions became about expressing an idea. What does it mean for a community to live with Pokémon? How does nature and technology coexist? What does identity look like when you have a region shaped by island culture or industrial spectacle? The map answered those questions before any character spoke a word. By looking at the layout of towns, the placement of routes, the geography of caves and mountains, you could read the thesis of that generation. The landmarks anchor the lore. Mount Coronet is not just a tall peak. It is the axis of the Pokémon universe, the place where time and space were born. The Tower of the Sun and the Tower of the Moon in Alola are not random ruins. They are places where the light of creation itself was once captured. Each cave, each shrine, each abandoned laboratory is a node in a network of meaning. The map is the narrator because it shows you where the important things are and why they matter. The villain teams also reflect this pattern. Team Rocket was organised crime, simple and direct, but later teams became expressions of regional anxieties. Team Magma and Team Aqua argued about land and sea. Team Galactic was obsessed with recreating the universe. Team Flare wanted beauty at any cost. Team Yell was a fan club. The threats changed because the regions themselves were changing, and the map was the stage where those conflicts played out. Even the Pokémon themselves began to reflect the geography. Regional forms emerged in Alola and spread to Galar, Hisui, and Paldea. These were not just palette swaps, they were signs that the environment itself shapes life. A Sandshrew in Alola became Ice-type because it adapted to snowy mountains. A Vulpix became Ice-type for the same reason. The ecosystem was so alive that the species themselves changed to match the land. The chronological arc is clear. From 1996 to 2022, the regions moved from mechanics to mythology, from Japan to the wider world, and from simple routes to deeply coded ecosystems. Kanto was the template, Johto was the bridge, Hoenn was the environment, Sinnoh was the cosmos, Unova was the reset, a new world inspired by New York, built to prove that Pokémon could be about reinvention. Kalos was elegance and tragedy, Alola was community and place, Galar was spectacle and industry, and Paldea opened up the landscape entirely, letting you explore a region that felt like a real breathing country. What connects them all is the hidden pattern. Each region is a thesis. It is an argument about what Pokémon should be at that moment in its history, and the land itself makes that argument silently but powerfully. This brings us to the region where it all started, the place that laid the foundation for every thesis that followed. Chapter 2: Kanto and the Architecture of Logic. Because before the pattern could become hidden, it had to be built, and Kanto was the blueprint. When we left off, we laid the foundation for a pattern that runs through every Pokémon region. Each one is a thesis statement about what its generation wanted the world to mean. But the first thesis, the one that started it all, wasn't a grand philosophical claim about nature or myth. It was something far more practical, and in its own way far more brilliant. Kanto is not a region shaped by its history or its ecology. It is a region shaped by mechanics. It is the industrial foundation of the entire franchise. Think about the layout of the Kanto map. It begins in Pallet Town, a small unassuming starting point. From there you travel north along a linear path to Viridian City, then through Viridian Forest and on to Pewter City. But very quickly the path opens into something unexpected. The route system in Kanto forms a circular loop. You can go from Cerulean City west to Saffron, or east through Rock Tunnel to Lavender Town, and eventually all the way around to the west side of the map. That loop is not an accident. It is a deliberate design choice that serves two purposes. It teaches you that the world is interconnected, and it forces you to make choices about which gyms to challenge and in what order. In fact, the circular loop is the most defining geographic feature of Kanto. It creates a sense of progression without being strictly linear. You can challenge the Saffron Gym early, but you'll find it blocked by a guard who demands a drink from Celadon. You can try to access Fuchsia City through the cycling road, but you need a bike. The loop becomes a puzzle in itself, and solving it requires exploring every node. This structure, the open loop that circles back on itself, is the true architecture of logic in Kanto. It rewards curiosity and punishes recklessness. And it introduces the idea that the map is not just a backdrop for adventure, it is the adventure. Then there is the gym system itself, which began with Kanto. The gyms are not arbitrary. They are arranged by type in a deliberate order that escalates difficulty and introduces new strategic concepts. Brock's rock types teach you about type advantage. Misty's water types force you to adapt. Surge's electric types demand speed and creativity. And at the end, Giovanni's ground types, which seems straightforward until you realize he is the leader of Team Rocket, and his gym is hidden inside a casino. The gym challenge becomes a narrative tool. The Elite Four are the final exam, but they are also the first time the game explicitly asks you to prepare a balanced team of 6. The structure of 8 gyms followed by the Elite Four is not just a gameplay loop. It is a thematic statement that progress is earned through mastery of the world's rules. And that brings us to Team Rocket. In the 1996 debut, Pokémon was grounded in a very realistic, almost gritty world. The original games had no time machine, no legendary beasts roaming the land, no ancient myths carved into the earth. Team Rocket was not a doomsday cult or an eco-terrorist group. They were organized crime. They ran a casino in Celadon City. They stole Pokémon from the Marowak in Lavender Tower, and they used the underground network beneath the department store to smuggle rare items. Their motivation was money, pure and simple. This urban crime element mirrors the tone of the original games. A world where crime is not cosmic but mundane. It is a world where greed and exploitation are the real threats, not some ancient deity awakened from a long slumber. Team Rocket's presence makes Kanto feel like a real place, a working region with a shadow economy. The grounded realism extends to the geography itself. Kanto is based on the real Kanto region of Japan, with locations that map loosely to actual cities. Pallet Town is a quiet seaside village. Viridian City is a forested gateway and is inspired by the commercial district of Tokyo. The region feels lived in, not designed. It is as if the developers started with a functional region and then built the game mechanics on top of it. This is the core of Kanto as an industrial foundation. The mechanics dictate the geography. The need for a circular loop dictated the shape of the map. The need for a progression of difficulty dictated the placement of gyms. The need for a villain that made sense within the world dictated Team Rocket. There is something deeply satisfying about this simplicity. Later regions would layer mythology, ecology, and culture on top of their geography. But Kanto is the blueprint. It is the region where every element is derived from what the game needs to teach you. The layout is a classroom. The routes are lessons. The cities are tests. And when you finally reach the Indigo Plateau, you have internalized the architecture of logic that will carry you through every future region. But even the cleanest blueprint has hidden rooms. One of those rooms is Lavender Town, a place that feels out of step with the rest of Kanto's functional design. It is a town built around a cemetery tower, filled with the ghosts of Pokémon. And those ghosts, they are not just sprites. They are the first hint that Kanto has a shadow, a subconscious that the game barely acknowledges. The ghost in the machine is already stirring, and it would not stay buried for long. But if Kanto was built as a machine, a region designed to teach you how to play, then what do we make of the places where that machine seems to glitch, where the clean loops and tidy progression give way to something uneasy? That is where we find the ghost in the machine. Lavender Town is the first instance of what I would call Laura's atmosphere in the entire series. It is not a place that explains its story. It does not have a library or a single NPC who sits you down to recite a history. Instead, the story is told entirely through feeling. The music, the darkened palette, the sudden shift in encounter rates. You arrive and you know something is wrong before anyone says a word. The Pokémon Tower looms over the town not as a landmark but as a wound, and the game trusts you to understand that this is a place of grief, not of gameplay. This is remarkable because Kanto, for all its mechanical clarity, had no ancient myths, no creation story, no legendary duo that founded the land. That was a deliberate choice. The designers wanted Kanto to feel modern, recent, a world of science, industry, and progress. Team Rocket is not a cult or a nature-worshipping sect. They are a criminal syndicate, as corporate as they are cruel. They steal Pokémon for profit, not prophecy. And the ultimate secret of Kanto is not a relic of some forgotten era, but a laboratory failure. An experiment that became a disaster. That disaster is the Cinnabar Island incident. The burned mansion, the scattered notes, the abandoned machine. It is the origin not just of Mewtwo, but of an entire ethical question that the rest of the franchise would try to answer. Mewtwo is not a god. It is a weapon, a clone born from the ambition of scientists who wanted to create the strongest Pokémon. And the game does not shy away from that horror. You find room after room of ruined equipment, half-written logs, and a sense of something that escaped before it was meant to exist. The Cinnabar Island disaster introduces genetic ethics to the Pokémon world, and it does so in a region that otherwise presents itself as clean and rational. So Kanto, the Foundation region, holds a secret contradiction. It appears to be the most straightforward of worlds, a simple grid of routes and badges. But underneath that surface, it is haunted. Haunted by questions of what we create, what we destroy, and what we choose to remember. Lavender Town is the memory, Cinnabar is the guilt, and Mewtwo is the result. Now that we have peeled back that surface, we begin to see that the very next region was built not to escape these questions, but to answer them. It is a land where the past refuses to stay buried, where every path leads back to Ancestry, and where the weight of history is something you carry with you from the very first step. We will walk that path together next. From the haunted frequencies of Lavender Town and the cold, sterile labs of Cinnabar Island, we carried with us a strange tension. Kanto had taught us that the world of Pokémon was built on logic, on systems, on progress. But beneath that surface, something older was stirring. The ghosts we encountered weren't just echoes of tragedy. They were reminders that every foundation rests on what came before. And as we crossed the border into Johto, that realization became impossible to ignore. Johto does not announce itself with skyscrapers or sprawling ports. It greets you with old roads, wooden signs, and the smell of damp earth after rain. Where Kanto was a gleaming machine of modern ambition, Johto is a living archive. Every stone in its walls, every bell in its towers, every pattern carved into its rooftops tells a story that began long before the first Pokédex was ever conceived. This is a region that wears its ancestry like a cloak, and it expects you to feel the weight. The moment you step into Ecological City, you understand. The streets are lined with traditional wooden buildings, their roofs curving upward like the wings of a great bird frozen in mid-flight. Lanterns glow softly in the evening, casting long shadows that seem to reach backward into time. At the center of it all rise two towers, one standing tall, the other a hollow shell. They are not just landmarks, they are the region's memory made visible. The architecture of Ecological doesn't try to look impressive. It tries to look permanent, as if the city itself is a monument to continuity in a world that constantly wants to move forward. It was here that the concept of historical continuity first became tangible in the Pokémon world. Kanto had history too, of course, but it was often hidden, buried beneath layers of concrete and commerce. Lavender Town's tower was a solitary memorial. In Johto, history is the air you breathe. The burned tower, standing in mute testimony to a fire that consumed it centuries ago, is not a relic to be hidden away. It is a bridge, a literal and metaphorical link between the past and the present, between the ancient legends of Ho-Oh and the modern trainers who walk its charred halls. You cannot traverse Johto without passing through that shadow, without acknowledging that something sacred once stood there and was lost. And that is the narrative purpose of the burned tower. It forces you to confront decay, to accept that not everything survives, but that what remains carries meaning. Inside its crumbling walls, you find the quiet of a cathedral. The beams are blackened, the floor uneven, but the silence is alive with the memory of bell chimes and prayers. It is a place where the legend of the three beasts was born, where a fire that should have erased everything instead created a new story. The tower does not heal, it does not rebuild, it endures. And in enduring, it connects you to every generation that stood there before. Johto wraps around you like a heavy quilt, each thread a story of ancestry. The region's gym leaders challenge you not just with strength but with tradition. Faulkner's flying-type gym is housed in a lighthouse built by his father. Bugsy studies ancient patterns in the ruins of Azalea Town. Whitney tends to a family legacy of Pokémon care. Even the Elite Four includes a Dragon Master whose entire lineage is tied to the legendary birds of Johto. Every battle is a test of whether you understand that power comes from respect for the past, not just ambition for the future. But Johto is not content to be a museum. It gives you the tools to carry its lessons forward. The Pokégear, the ability to call your mother, the day-night cycle that changes the world around you. These are small touches that remind you time is passing, and that you are part of a continuum. When you finally return to Kanto at the end of your journey, you see it with new eyes. The sleek, modern towers of Saffron, the busy streets of Celadon, they no longer feel like the whole picture. They feel like one chapter in a much longer story. The weight of Ancestry does not crush you, it anchors you. It gives you a place to stand while the winds of change blow. And as the sun sets over the Tin Tower, casting orange light across the burned tower's empty frame, you realize that Johto is not just a region. It is the moment the Pokémon world learned to look backward, to honor what was lost, and to understand that every new generation is built on the bones of the old. This connection between what was and what will be, this direct thread that Johto wove into the fabric of the franchise, is not just a narrative device. It is the key to understanding everything that follows. And in our next chapter, we will follow that thread into the heart of the pattern itself. The direct connection between Kanto and Johto is more than a map link. It is the first time the series admitted that its world was alive, growing, and carrying the scars of its own history. We left Johto standing in the shadow of Ecology's burned tower, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on every cobblestone and shrine. That sense of history is not just atmosphere, it is the very structure of the region. But here is the detail that makes Johto unlike any other Pokémon world we will ever visit. It is the only region that physically connects to its predecessor. Not through a boat ride, not through a flight, not through a post-credits screen that says, "And then you could go to the old place." You walk there, you cross a simple border at the base of Mount Silver, and the geography of Kanto unfolds before you as naturally as if it had always been there. This is the bridge mechanic, and it is so quietly revolutionary that we often forget how strange it really is. Every other region in the main series exists as a self-contained map, even when later games allow you to travel between them. Like in the Alola to Kanto transfer in Sun and Moon, it happens through a menu, a cutscene, or an off-screen journey. But in Gold and Silver, and their remakes, you go from New Bark Town to Viridian City by walking through a cave and then down a route. There is no loading screen between worlds. There is no denial of continuity. The game treats Kanto and Johto as one continuous landmass, and in doing so, it recontextualizes everything you have done. Think about what that means for the player's journey. You start in Johto as a young trainer in a region that feels ancient, steeped in ritual and legend. You climb the towers, you meet the kimono girls, you chase the mysterious beasts that flee across the countryside, you defeat the Johto League champions. and you are ready for the credits to roll, but they do not. Instead, the game invites you east. It opens a door that in any other generation would remain locked, and there, on the other side of that door, is Kanto, the region where the entire franchise began. But it is not the same Kanto you remember from Red and Blue. It is older now. It has aged alongside you. The cities are still there. The routes are still mapped. But the gym leaders have changed. Some are stronger, others have moved on. The world has continued to turn while you were away in Johto. That is an extraordinary narrative choice. It tells you that your original adventure was not a singular event. It was a moment in time, and now you are living in the aftermath. The player's journey in Johto is not a new beginning. It is a continuation of a timeline that started years earlier on a different cartridge. You are not just the hero of this new region, you are the heir to the previous one. This is where the legendary trio enters the story, not as gods of creation or destroyers of worlds, but as protectors of regional balance. In Johto, that balance is not cosmic, it is ecological. The trio of Raikou, Entei and Suicune represent the forces of lightning, fire and water that shape the land. They are not tied to any single human narrative. They do not speak or form alliances. They roam the world freely, and you can only encounter them by chance, by persistence, by following the rumors that drift from one town to the next. They are wild in a way that Mewtwo was not. Mewtwo was a creation with a purpose. These three are forces of nature with a pulse. Their introduction in the Burned Tower is a master stroke of world building. You find them trapped inside the ruins of a fire that, according to legend, consumed a brass tower 150 years earlier. A lightning strike ignited the blaze, and 3 nameless Pokémon perished in the flames. But Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokémon, resurrected them as new beings. That resurrection is not just mythology. It is the origin story of the region's protective system. The trio now patrols Johto and Kanto, maintaining the equilibrium between land, sea and sky. They are the reason the region feels alive, beyond its human structures. And so the post-game is not a bonus. It is the true test of your understanding. By returning to Kanto, you are not completing a checklist. You are stepping into a legacy. The gym leaders there have grown, some harder. Some have changed their specialties entirely. You face a version of Kanto that has been reshaped by time, just as you have been reshaped by your journey through Johto. And when you finally stand atop Mount Silver confronting Red, the silent protagonist from the original games, you are facing the ghost of the past made flesh. Red is not a villain, he is a reflection. He shows you what you could become if you stopped growing, and he challenges you to prove that you have transcended the old world. That is the power of the direct connection. Johto does not just borrow from Kanto. It inherits it, reinterprets it, and then forces you to earn your place within it. No other region ever dared to do that. Later generations would build their own worlds with their own histories, sometimes referencing past regions, but always keeping them at a distance. Johto is the only one that opens the door and says, "Come back, see how it has changed. See how you have changed." And as we stand on that threshold, looking out over the waters that separate Johto from a larger world, we begin to sense the next great shift. Because after history comes ecology, after tradition comes the wild, after the weight of ancestry comes the breath of the earth itself. The region that follows Johto will not look backward, it will look outward, to the sea, to the islands, to the storms that shape the horizon. The next chapter in this hidden pattern is one of balance, not between two regions, but between the forces of expansion and preservation, growth and stillness. It is a pivot that will redefine what a region can be. Johto gave us a world that looked backward, a region built on continuity, on the weight of history. It made sense because it was tethered to Kanto, a living museum where the past and present coexisted. But if Johto was about ancestry, then the generation that followed in 2002 asked a different question entirely. What happens when the world stops looking at what came before and starts looking at what is? What happens when the environment itself becomes the story? Hoenn was the pivot. It was a declaration that Pokémon regions could be more than just a series of routes and towns connected by logic or tradition. It could be a living, breathing ecosystem. One that forced players to confront the tension between civilization, between growth and conservation. The game came out at a time when environmentalism was beginning to seep into mainstream consciousness. But Game Freak wasn't just following a trend. They were betting that a region defined by water and weather could work both mechanically and narratively. It was a gamble, and it was a huge one. Consider the sheer amount of water in Hoenn. The map is nearly half ocean, with vast stretches of open sea connecting the land masses. For a handheld RPG in 2002, that was a technical challenge, rendering water tiles, managing the encounter rates, making sure the player didn't get lost or bored. But it was also a narrative risk. Water in games often serves as a barrier, blank space to be crossed. Hoenn flipped that. Water became the stage. It made the region feel fragmented, like a chain of islands forced to work together. And that fragmentation perfectly mirrored the thematic conflict at the heart of the story. That conflict was between two groups, Team Aqua, who wanted to expand the seas, and Team Magma, who wanted to expand the land. Both saw their goal as restoration, not destruction. For the first time in Pokémon's history, the villain teams weren't just criminals or power-hungry organizations. They were ideologues, driven by a genuine belief that the world had lost its balance, and that balance was tied directly to the biomes you traveled through. Hoenn didn't just have a variety of environments, it had a purpose behind them. The dense forests of Petalburg Woods, the volcanic heat of Mount Chimney, the arid deserts of Route 111, the deep-sea trenches of Route 128. Each biome felt like a different argument in a larger debate about what nature should look like. And then there was the weather. Weather had existed in previous games, rain in Kanto's routes, the occasional sandstorm, but it was purely atmospheric. In Hoenn, weather became a storytelling device. The constant rain in Route 119, the scorching sun on the desert floor, the hail that fell near the top of Mount Pyre. These weren't just visual touches. They shaped the gameplay, yes, but more importantly, they shaped the narrative. You could feel the environment fighting back. The weather was a character in the drama, a manifestation of the escalating conflict between land and sea. When you finally reached the Cave of Origin and awakened Groudon or Kyogre, the weather patterns across the entire region changed. The world literally shifted under your feet. This was a pivot, not just for Pokémon, but for video game world building in general. The environment was no longer a backdrop, it was the plot. Hoenn taught us that a region could be an argument, a thesis about the relationship between humanity and the natural world, and it did so by embracing its own contradictions. Too much water, too many routes, too many islands that felt disconnected unless you understood the underlying ecology. When you left Hoenn, you didn't leave a map, you left a living system, and the next generation would take that lesson and push it even further, turning the very fabric of the world into a creation myth. But before we reach that summit, we need to understand the one creature that ruled over these seas and skies, the sovereign that made the weather behave, that anchored the entire ecological argument. That story belongs to the next chapter, where we'll dive into the legend of the King of the Sea and the Master of the Skies. When we left Hoenn, we were standing at the edge of its great ecological pivot, a region built not just on land and water, but on the tension between them. The abundance of sea routes, the dense jungles, the volcanic mountains, all of it felt like a deliberate statement. This is a world where nature itself is the antagonist, or perhaps the protagonist, depending on your perspective. But what made Hoenn truly unforgettable was not just its biomes, it was the forces that shaped them. Kyogre and Groudon are not simply powerful Pokémon, they are the first genuine primal forces, tied directly to regional geography. In Kanto, legendary Pokémon like Mewtwo were created in a lab, born from human ambition and genetic tampering. In Johto, The legendary beasts were the result of a tragic fire, transformed by Ho-Oh's resurrection. These were stories that connected to the land, yes, but only through human or Pokémon action. Hoenn rewrote that equation. Here, the land itself was the battlefield. The ocean and the continent were not just backdrops, they were the combatants. You see, the central conflict of Hoenn is not between right and wrong, or between two villain teams. It is between expansion and containment. Groudon wants to raise the land, to create more dry surface for life to flourish. Kyogre wants to expand the sea, to drown the world in endless rain. Each is driven by a primordial instinct so ancient that it predates human memory. And this instinct is etched into the very geography of Hoenn. Look at the map. The landmass is broken, scattered almost like fragments of a continent that was torn apart by some colossal struggle. The abundance of water routes is not just a design choice to challenge the player. It is a scar left by the war between these two titans. And the most visible scar of all is Sootopolis City. Sootopolis is built inside a volcanic crater. Not on a crater, not near one, but inside it. The city is a perfect ring of civilization, surrounding a still, deep pool of water. And at the center of that pool lies the Cave of Origin, the place where Kyogre and Groudon once clashed. The crater itself is not volcanic in the usual sense. It is a caldera formed by the explosive release of energy when two continental-scale forces collided. Generations of Hoenn residents built their homes within this ring, not out of ignorance, but out of reverence. They understood that the crater was a monument to a war that once reshaped the world, and they chose to live inside that memory, to honor the peace that followed. That peace was made possible by a third force, Rayquaza, and with Rayquaza, Pokémon lore established a trope that would echo through every subsequent generation. The Mediator. Rayquaza does not descend from the sky to fight Kyogre and Groudon directly in the sense of overwhelming them. Instead, it mediates. It ends the conflict by restoring balance. In the lore, Rayquaza's role is to quell the primal urges of the other two, to force them back into dormancy. This is not a battle of destruction. It is an act of arbitration, and this became the template for every later legendary trio. One creator or ruler, two opposed forces, and a third entity that harmonizes them. Dialga and Palkia have Giratina, Tornadus and Thundurus have Landorus, Xerneas and Yveltal have Zygarde. The pattern is unmistakable, but it began here, in Hoenn, with a serpent of the sky who watched over a world that could never be allowed to tip too far in either direction. What makes this so compelling is that Rayquaza's role is not merely symbolic. It is rooted in the geography of the Hoenn region. Rayquaza lives in the ozone layer above the clouds. Its domain is the sky, above the eternal struggle of sea and land, and it only descends when that struggle threatens to destroy everything. The weather itself becomes the battlefield. Sunny days represent Groudon's influence, rain represents Kyogre's, and when both are present, the sky turns red and violent, a sign that the Mediator must intervene. This is not just a game mechanic, it is a world-building tool that tells you, without words, that the forces of nature are always in a delicate balance, and that balance is fragile. Sootopolis City, then, is not just a location, it is a thesis statement. It tells you that the world you walk through was once a war zone. A crater is a wound that never fully healed, and the people who live there are the descendants of survivors who chose to stay, to remember, to rebuild on the very ground where gods once fought. That is a powerful idea, and it is one that would be refined and expanded in the next chapter of this journey, when a region built around a mountain at the center of the world would ask an even larger question. What created the universe itself, and what lies beyond the boundaries of time and space? We left Hoenn with its great clash of primal forces, with Kyogre and Groudon locked in an eternal war for the climate, and with the crater of Sootopolis City standing as a scar from that ancient battle. That crater was a physical reminder that the Pokémon world had a deep mythological past, but it was a past still tied to the planet itself, to oceans and continents and weather. In 2006, Game Freak turned their gaze upward. They moved from the ecology of a single region to the origin of all things. That was the year Sinnoh arrived, and with it, the franchise made its most audacious leap. From regional folklore to universal creation myth, Sinnoh is a region defined by a single colossal landmark. Mount Coronet rises at its very centre, a jagged spine of rock that splits the landmass into two distinct halves. It is not just a mountain, it is the axis of the entire Pokémon world. In mythology, such a sacred mountain is called an axis mundi, the point where the heavens and the earth meet, the navel of the cosmos. Mount Coronet is exactly that. Its summit is said to be where the first Pokémon, Arceus, brought the universe into being, and its caves and ridges contain the hidden chambers where time and space themselves were born. This is no longer a story about a local volcano or a weather-controlling beast. This is a story about the beginning of existence. The jump from regional ecology to universal creation myths in 2006 was not subtle. Hoenn's legendaries had been forces of nature. Kyogre expanded the seas, Groudon raised the land, Rayquaza quelled the storm. They were powerful, but they were still part of the world. Sinnoh's legendaries are the world. Dialga is time, Palkia is space, and Giratina is antimatter, the force that dwells in a parallel dimension. And above them all sits Arceus, the creator deity, a being that hatched from an egg in a void of nothing and shaped the entire cosmos with its 1,000 arms. The theological implications of the Sinnoh region are staggering. Before 2006, Pokémon had gods of nature. Now it had a god of gods. And yet the region itself is grounded in a very real human geography. Sinnoh is based on the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido, a place known for its mountains, cold winters, and surviving Ainu culture. Mount Coronet is a fictionalized version of the central mountains of Hokkaido, and the region's two halves mirror the real island's east-west split, but the designers did something new. They placed the entire gameplay progression around ascending that central mountain. You cannot simply walk around it. You must climb it, tunnel through it, and ultimately stand at its peak to confront the living embodiment of time itself. The journey through Sinnoh is a pilgrimage to the center of the universe. The snow that blankets much of the region, the dark caves, the sense of isolation, all of it reinforces the feeling that you are traveling through a land that is older, colder, and more mysterious than anywhere before. The Sinnoh Pokédex is smaller than Hoenn's, but it feels denser, more deliberate. Every legendary encounter is a ritual. You need special items to open the gates to their chambers, and those chambers are hidden in the most remote corners of the mountain. The sense of cosmic scale is built into the very design of the map. Mount Coronet, as the Axis Mundi, is not just a physical center, it is the narrative fulcrum. Everything in Sinnoh revolves around it. The villainous team, Team Galactic, wants to use the mountain's connection to the creation trio to remake reality. The ancient lore of the region, preserved in tablets and murals, tells of the original myth, and the player, by climbing that peak, becomes a witness to creation itself. For the first time, a Pokémon game asked you to consider not just the balance of nature, but the origin of time, space, and matter. It asked you to stand at the birthplace of the universe. That shift changed everything. After Sinnoh, no region could simply be a collection of roots and cities. Every new land had to carry its own myth, its own theological weight. But Sinnoh did something even more profound. It made the unseen tangible. The Distortion world, the realm where Giratina dwells, is a broken reflection of reality, a place where gravity is optional and dimensions fold. And that is where the next chapter of our story will take us. For if Mount Coronet is the axis of the physical universe, then there is a place where that axis bends and cracks. That place is the Distortion of Reality, and it hides a truth that Sinnoh only hinted at. From Mount Coronet, the axis of the universe, Sinnoh's mythology spills outward in every direction. That central mountain is not just a landmark, it is the spine of creation itself, the place where time and space were said to have been given form. But what happens when you look beyond that spine? What exists on the other side of the fabric of reality? In the games of 2006, Sinnoh introduced a concept that had never been attempted in Pokémon before. A parallel dimension, counterpoint to the physical map that players could actually walk through. This is the Distortion world, and it redefines everything you thought you knew about the geography of this region. The Distortion world is not a place you stumble upon. It is a prison, a pocket of antimatter, a realm where gravity itself seems to have lost its anchor. Giratina, the third member of the creation trio, was banished here for its violent nature. While Dialga commands time and Palkia governs space, Giratina presides over everything that exists in opposition to order, the chaotic underbelly of reality. To enter the Distortion world is to step into a gravity-defying maze, where floors become walls and ceilings become pathways. It is a literal inversion of the Sinnoh map you have been exploring, a dark mirror of Mount Coronet and the lakes below, and in that inversion lies a profound narrative purpose. It forces you to question whether the world you know is the only world there is. But before we descend into that anti-realm, we must understand what gives the physical world its very structure. Sinnoh's mythology does not begin with the creation trio alone. It begins with three smaller beings, the Lake Guardians, who were born from the same primordial egg as Arceus. Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf are not just legendary Pokémon. They are the embodiment of the human psyche. Uxie represents knowledge, the ability to perceive and record the world. Mesprit represents emotion, the capacity to feel and connect. Azelf represents willpower, the drive to act and shape one's destiny. Together, they form the foundation of consciousness itself. Without knowledge, you cannot understand. Without emotion, you cannot care. Without will, you cannot move forward. The lakes they inhabit, Acuity, Valor and Verity, are not random bodies of water. They are the well springs of what makes a human being human. Now consider the villain who seeks to erase that humanity. Team Galactic is not like Team Rocket, driven by greed, or Team Magma and Aqua, driven by ecological extremes. Their leader Cyrus has no interest in money or land. He looks at the world and sees only imperfection, pain, conflict, desire, all born from the very psyche that the Lake Guardians represent. His goal is to use the power of Dialga and Palkia to unmake reality and create a new universe. One without spirit, without will, without emotion. This is the shift from villainous greed to existential nihilism. Team Galactic is not trying to steal your Pokémon. They are trying to steal existence itself. And in their headquarters, you find a chilling architectural reflection of that goal. Cold, metallic, sterile. There is no colour, no warmth, no life. It is a blueprint for a dead universe. And so the player's journey becomes not a quest for badges, but a defence of consciousness. You are not just stopping a crime, you are safeguarding the very structure of the human soul. When you finally confront Cyrus in the Distortion world, you are standing in the place where reality has already been unmade. The floors shift, the perspective warps, and you must navigate a space that defies every rule you have learned. This is the narrative counterpoint to the physical map, a realm that exists as a critique of the ordered geography you have travelled. The Distortion world is not a hidden cave or a bonus dungeon. It is the philosophical opposite of Sinnoh's structured routes and symmetrical lakes. It is the answer to the question, what if order had never been imposed? When you defeat Cyrus and capture or defeat Giratina, you restore balance. But that balance is fragile. The Lake Guardians return to their lakes, and the world continues. But something has changed. You have seen behind the curtain. You know that reality is not a given. It is a construct maintained by ancient forces and guarded by the will of beings like Azelf. And that knowledge lingers as you close the game and move on to the next region. But what happens when a region decides to reject mythology entirely? What happens when a generation looks at the cosmic scale of Sinnoh and says, let us start over from scratch? That is exactly what the next region does. It is a reset, a deliberate break from the past, built on the streets of a real-world city and driven by a new kind of conflict. The story of Unova is the story of reinvention, and it begins with a single question. What if the old legends were not true? That is where we are headed next. Unova and the Great Reset. We left Sinnoh suspended in the metaphysical, a region built around the axis of creation, where Mount Coronet pierced the fabric of space and time itself. The Distortion world was the logical endpoint of that journey, a place where the rules of geography dissolved, and the player finally understood that the Pokémon universe was not just a collection of routes and cities, but a layered cosmos held together by consciousness, memory, and will. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf had given form to the mind, emotion, and willpower of every living being. It was a profound revelation, but it also exhausted a certain kind of storytelling. Once you have touched the origin of existence, where else can you go? The answer came in 2010, and it was a radical break from everything that had come before. The decision to sever all ties with the first 4 regions was not made lightly, but it was made deliberately. Kanto, Johto, Hoenn and Sinnoh were all in some way connected by a shared mythology, a shared history, a shared sense of ancient Japanese origin. Each generation had introduced new Pokémon, but the world itself felt like a contiguous landmass, a single continent expanding outward from the forests of Pallet Town. But the designers wanted something new. They wanted to step away from the familiar, to prove that Pokémon could exist anywhere, not just in the cultural landscape of Japan. And so they turned to the most iconic city of the modern world, New York City. New York City became the blueprint for a more diverse, urban and socially complex world. Unova was not a region of quiet forests and ancient shrines. It was a region of skyscrapers and bridges, of bustling streets and underground railways. Castelia City, the central metropolis, was a direct homage to Lower Manhattan, with its towering buildings and crowded harbors. The entire region was shaped like a cross between Manhattan and the state of New York, with landmarks like the Skyro Bridge, echoing the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Marvelous Bridge, referencing the Verrazano. But the change was not just cosmetic. Unova was the first region to prioritize thematic philosophy over simple adventure. The story was no longer about a young trainer collecting badges and beating a criminal organization. It was about a fundamental conflict between 2 opposing views of the world, the pursuit of truth versus the pursuit of ideals. This is why Unova felt different. The team of villains, Team Plasma, was not a simple gang of thieves. They were a philosophical movement, led by a man named Getsis, who used the idealistic visionary N as his puppet. The player was no longer just a hero. They were a participant in a debate about the nature of Pokémon and humans. Should Pokémon be freed from their trainers, or is the bond between them sacred? The region itself echoed that tension. The Skyro Bridge divided the city from the mainland, and at the center of the map was the Relic Castle, a buried reminder of an ancient war between truth and ideals. The geography of Unova was literally shaped by the ideas it was trying to express. And then there was the sheer scale of the region. Unova had 156 new Pokémon, more than any generation since the original 151. It was a deliberate reset. No older Pokémon appeared in the wild until the post-game. This forced players to rediscover the world without the comfort of familiar partners. It was a bold move, and it worked because the new creatures were designed with the urban setting in mind. The Pidove line, the Patrat line, the Woobat line. They felt like city wildlife, creatures that had adapted to concrete and steel. The legendary Pokémon, Reshiram and Zekrom, embodied the thematic core, one representing truth, the other representing ideals, and the third Dragon Curum representing the hollow shell of a world without either. The result was a region that felt alive with conflict and meaning. Every gym leader had a clear personality and role in the story. Every town had a distinct character, from the industrial Nimbasa city, with its amusement park, to the rural Accumula town, where N first spoke to the player, and the league itself was a culmination of that philosophy. The Elite Four were no longer just obstacles. They were the champions of Unova's beliefs. It was a new kind of Pokémon adventure, one that asked the player to think about why they were traveling, not just where they were going. As the credits rolled on Unova, the world of Pokémon had been fundamentally reshaped. The old regions were still there, but the franchise had proven it could reinvent itself, that it could look forward instead of backward, and the next chapter would only deepen that division, forcing players to choose between two dragons, two truths, and two ideals. That story, the story of truth versus ideals, is where we will turn next. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. We left off with Unova, a deliberate reset. After 4 generations rooted in Japanese geography and mythology, Game Freak turned to New York City, a place that felt like the center of the modern world. But the real story of Unova isn't just its urban skyline or its sprawling bridges. It's the argument at its core, the conflict between truth and ideals. And to understand why that matters, we have to look at the 2 dragons that embody those forces. Reshiram and Zekrom are not just legendary Pokémon, they are philosophical positions given form. Reshiram represents truth, the world as it is, with all its flaws and unchangeable facts. Zekrom represents ideals, the world as it could be, a vision of perfection that demands change. And in Unova, these 2 forces are locked in an ancient war that never really ended. The region itself is still caught in that war. Every city, every route, every character you meet is shaped by the tension between what is real and what people want to believe. Think about it. Team Plasma doesn't want to capture Pokémon for power, they want to liberate them. But that liberation is based on an ideal. A world where people and Pokémon are separate, each free to follow their own nature. It's a noble vision, but it ignores the truth of the bond that has existed for centuries. Hoenn, their leader, is the purest expression of this. He can hear the voices of Pokémon, and he believes they are suffering in captivity. He is sincere, he is kind, but he is also wrong because he is blinded by his ideal. And then there is the player character. You, the champion of truth. You see the Pokémon you've raised, the friendships you've built, the mutual trust. That is the truth Hoenn cannot see. The game forces you to choose between these 2 dragons, but really, you are choosing which lens to view the world through. Do you side with Reshiram and embrace the truth of your own experience, even if it's messy? Or do you side with Zekrom and strive for an ideal that might never be realized? It is a choice that mirrors the debates we have in our own society, between pragmatism and vision, between the possible and the perfect. Hoenn's castle appears without warning. You finish your journey through the Victory Road. You step into the Pokémon League, and instead of the traditional gauntlet of elite trainers, you find a castle. It has erupted from the ground, literally breaking the foundation of the League. This is not just a dramatic set piece, it is a metaphor. The ideals of Team Plasma have invaded the institution that represents the established order. The castle is a physical intrusion, but it also represents an ideological one. The League stands for the truth of the Pokémon world as it has always been. Capture, train, battle, become champion. Hoenn's castle challenges that truth by offering a different ideal. The building itself becomes a character, a statement that the old rules are being questioned, and Unova's map design supports this narrative in a subtle but powerful way. Unlike the more open regions that came before, Unova is surprisingly linear. The routes snake northward from the starting town, in a mostly straight line, with few branching paths. This is not a flaw, it is intentional. This linearity gives the journey a cinematic quality, a sense of momentum that pushes you toward a single climax. You are not exploring a vast wilderness, you are following a story. Every city you pass through, Striaton, Nakreen, Castelia, Nimbasa, feels like a chapter in a novel. The path is narrow, but it is purposeful. By the time you reach the castle, you have been guided step by step toward that final confrontation. The map is a narrative tool, not just a playground. The ideological conflict between Reshiram and Zekrom is not resolved by the player's choice alone. Even after you defeat Hoenn and Thesis, the dragons remain dormant. The question lingers. What is more important, truth or ideals? Maybe they need each other. A world without ideals is stagnant, but a world without truth is delusion. Unova, with its towering skyscrapers and its hidden forests, is a region that asks you to hold both in your mind at once. And as you step away from that castle, as the credits roll, you might wonder what other questions Pokémon regions are asking. The next region, built on elegance and artistry, has a very different answer. Kalos is not about truth or ideals. It is about beauty and what it means to pursue something that can never be truly captured. But that is a story for another breath, another night. After the ideological clash of Unova, after the city of bridges and the castle that rose from the ground to challenge the very idea of what it meant to be a trainer, there had to be a change in pace. The next region did not announce itself with conflict or with the weight of a new world order. Instead, it arrived with a sense of breathless elegance, as though the series had stepped out of a subway station and into a sunlit garden. Kalos. The name alone seems to curl around the tongue like a silk ribbon, and everything about this region is designed to make you stop and stare, not at a grand myth or a primal beast, but at something far more subtle. A culture built on the pursuit of beauty. It is the most self-consciously stylish region ever created, inspired not by the bustling grid of New York, but by the refined contours of France. The snow-capped peaks of the Alps, the winding streets of Paris, the lavender fields of Provence, all of it pressed into a single, cohesive aesthetic that feels less like a video game map and more like a living postcard. Every city in Kalos has a distinctive flair. Lumio City stands at the center, a sprawling metropolis built around a massive prism tower that glows at night like a jewel. The streets radiate outward in tight concentric rings, and the camera can swivel in full 360, letting you see the city from every angle as if strolling through a gallery. Boutiques offer hairstyles and clothing that reflect real Parisian fashion trends. You can dye your Pokémon's fur, change your own outfit, and pose for photos in front of famous landmarks. The region practically begs you to take a moment and appreciate the surface of things. But surface in Kalos is never the whole story. Beneath that flawless veneer, the land hides a memory so old and so violent that the very stones seem to hold their breath. 3,000 years before the player arrives, a war tore across this region. It was not a war of ideologies or territorial ambition. It was a war of survival, and in the final desperate hour, the king of Kalos ordered the construction of something terrible. A weapon that could reshape the world itself. This is the ultimate weapon, not a device that simply destroys. It is something far more raw. The king, in his grief over the loss of his own Pokémon in the war, poured the life energy of countless others into a machine that could turn death into a kind of final, absolute power. The weapon fired. It ended the war, but at a cost that the region never forgot. The land itself absorbed the blast, and that energy did not dissipate. It lingered. It sank into the earth, into the stones, into the very bond between people and their Pokémon. And that lingering energy became the key to something that would only be rediscovered thousands of years later. Mega Evolution. It is not simply a battle gimmick. It is a lore-heavy mechanic that ties directly to this specific regional history. Mega Evolution requires a trainer and a Pokémon to share a bond strong enough to channel the latent energy of the ultimate weapon. The stone itself, a keystone in the trainer's hand, a Mega Stone held by the Pokémon, is a fragment of that ancient explosion, crystallized and preserved. When the two resonate together, something primal awakens. The Pokémon's form distorts, its power skyrockets, and it touches a transformation that is not natural evolution, but a temporary violent return to an older, more powerful state. This explains why Mega Evolution is not found in every region. It is not a universal phenomenon. It is a scar left by a weapon that tried to end suffering through absolute force, and instead seeded the world with the capacity for temporary transcendence. The region of Kalos, in its pursuit of beauty, also carries the burden of that history. The battle chateau, the glittering boutiques, the art galleries, they all sit above a buried memory of fire and grief. And standing at the heart of this contradiction is the legendary Pokémon Xerneas and Yveltal. One embodies eternal life, the other absolute death. Xerneas appears as a majestic stag with antlers glowing in rainbow hues, a being of creation and renewal. Yveltal resembles a dark, avian creature with wings that seem to absorb light, a force of destruction and entropy. They are not enemies in the simple sense. They are complementing forces, and their conflict or harmony defines the balance of Kalos itself. When the player finally reaches the ultimate hidden chamber beneath Geosenge town, they discover the truth. The king of Kalos was not a villain in the conventional sense. He was a man who loved so deeply that he could not accept loss. His weapon was built from that love turned inward, twisted into a solution that demanded sacrifice. And the player, with the help of the region's legendary Pokémon, must decide whether to activate the weapon again or to let it rest. It is a narrative that asks a quiet question. Does beauty require a price? And if so, what are we willing to pay? The story stays with you long after the credits roll, because it never resolves that tension fully. Kalos is left as a region that has learned to live with its scars. The fashion shows continue. The cafes stay open. The Prism Tower still gleams pink and gold at dusk. But beneath every elegant courtyard, the earth hums with a frequency that only those who know how to listen can hear. And in that listening, we begin to sense that the pattern underlying every Pokémon region is not just about geography or history. It is about the cycles that connect life to death, creation to destruction, and the moments of grace that become possible when we hold both in our hands. That is where our story must go next, into the heart of those cycles, into the very essence of what it means to begin and to end, into the empty throne of a legendary whose name has never been spoken aloud, and whose domain is the only journey that every living thing must take. We call it the cycle of life and death, but the next chapter will show you why that phrase is only the surface of a much deeper mystery. The war that built the ultimate weapon was not just a conflict of kings and armies. It was a war that consumed the very land of Kalos, leaving scars so deep that even 3,000 years later, the earth remembers. But what was the price of using that weapon? What did it cost to turn the life force of Pokémon into a tool of destruction? The answer lies in two beings, two forces that are as old as life itself, and they are the living bookends of the Kalosian identity. Xerneas and Yveltal, the cycle of life and death given form. In every generation of Pokémon, the legendary Pokémon embody the core theme of their region. But in Kalos, the theme is not just balance or creation. It is the entire biological arc of existence. Xerneas is life itself, its body a radiant network of antlers that pulse with the energy of the forest, the breath of spring, the first heartbeat of a newborn creature. Yveltal is death, its wings woven from shadow and bone, its talons gripping the moment of final stillness. They are not opposites in conflict. They are partners in a cycle as natural as the turning of the seasons. And the people of ancient Kalos knew this intimately, because they built their greatest monument directly on top of the place where that cycle was broken. Geosenge town sits quietly in the heart of the region, a small settlement of stone cottages and winding paths, surrounded by the gentle hills of central Kalos. Most tourists see only a picturesque village with a few old ruins, but those ruins are not decorative. They are the remnants of a massive stone circle, a structure as old as the war itself, built to channel the life force of countless Pokémon into the ultimate weapon. You can still see the raised platforms, the carved channels where energy once flowed, the faint impressions of what must have been a terrible concentration of power. And if you stand in the center of that circle, you can feel it, a silence that is too quiet, a weight in the air that has nothing to do with the altitude. The tragedy of Geosenge is not just that the weapon was used, it is that the people who built it understood exactly what they were doing. They knew the cost. They activated the device in the presence of Xerneas or Yveltal, depending on which version of the story you follow. And they drain the life of the entire region to fuel their king's ambition. The stones themselves are the physical remnants of that tragedy, standing as monuments to a broken covenant between humanity and the natural order. And that is why Kalos represents the franchise's peak of what we might call romanticized history. Romanticized history is not simply nostalgia. It is the act of taking a past tragedy and weaving it into the cultural DNA of a place until the landscape itself tells a story. Kalos does this better than any other region because every mountain, every forest, every elegant city was touched by that ancient war. The beauty of Lumiose City, with its grand boulevards and art galleries, exists because the war ended and peace allowed culture to flourish. The vineyards of the southwestern route grow in soil that once drank the energy of Pokémon, and the legend of the ultimate weapon is not a secret. It is carved into the very architecture of the region, from the statues in Parfum Palace to the stained glass windows of the Pokémon League. When you walk through Geosenge Town today, you are walking through a living museum of grief. The old stones have been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, but they still hold the geometry of the circle. You can trace the outline with your foot. You can stand where the weapon was activated, and if you listen closely, the wind sounds like a long, slow exhale. That is the breath of Kalos, still recovering from a wound it never fully healed. And yet the cycle continues. Xerneas and Yveltal do not judge. They simply are. When the weapon was fired, it did not destroy the nature of life and death. It only forced them into a collision, and the result was a third being, Zygarde, the embodiment of order, created to monitor the balance. But that is a story for another night. For now, consider this. Kalos is the only region where the motif of beauty is directly tied to a crime against nature. The prettiest towns, the most elegant cafes, the most refined art, all of it rests on a foundation of ash and sacrifice. That is romanticized history at its most potent. A place that remembers its horror but chooses to grow flowers over the graves. And as the sun sets on Kalos, a different kind of light begins to rise over an ocean of islands, where the spirit of life is not remembered in stone, but felt in the warmth of the sun and the rhythm of the waves. That spirit does not mourn the past. It dances on the shore, and soon we will step onto those sands. The shadow of Kalos's ancient war, its ultimate weapon, its petrified forest, its 3,000-year-old graves, dissipates as we cross the ocean to Alola. Here, the narrative of Pokémon takes an entirely different turn. One rooted not in the weight of history, but in the rhythm of the tide and the bond between a people and the land they call home. You will find no grand cathedrals of stone, no fossilized battlefields. Instead, Alola offers something more intimate, a redefinition of what a journey can mean. Alola is made of 4 natural islands, Melamela, Akala, Ula Ula, and Pony. Each one a distinct world with its own microclimate, its own local traditions, and its own guardian deity. These islands are not connected by underground tunnels or long bridges. They are separated by stretches of open ocean, and the only way to move between them is by boat, by flying, or by riding a Pokémon that knows the currents. This geography forces a slower pace, a deeper engagement with each place. You cannot simply run through routes and forget them. You have to live on each island, learn its personality, earn its trust. And here is where Alola makes its most radical break. There are no gyms, no badges, no Elite Four in the traditional sense. The very structure that defined every region from Kanto to Kalos is abandoned. In its place, the Island Challenge, a series of trials set by the island's kahuna, or chief, and the captains who oversee each trial. Instead of battling a gym leader for a badge, you complete a task that tests your understanding of the island's culture, its environment, and its Pokémon. You might have to gather ingredients for a traditional dish, or solve a puzzle involving the local ecosystem, or face a totem Pokémon. A creature enhanced by the island's natural energy, made stronger and more aware of its surroundings because of the deep connection it shares with the land. This is not a competition. It is a rite of passage. The Island Challenge is a way of saying, you are not here to conquer Alola, you are here to become part of it. And that idea, becoming part of a place, is the heart of Alola's redefinition of the human-Pokémon relationship. The phrase often used is partnership of place. It means that a trainer and their Pokémon are not just a team. They are an extension of the island itself. The regional variants that appear here are not accidents of evolution. They are expressions of Alola's spirit. Alolan Executor grows tall because the sun is relentless. Alolan Sandshrew and Sandslash have adapted to the snowy peaks of Mount Lanakila, because even in a tropical paradise, there are extremes. Alolan Vulpix and Ninetales are ice types, a direct inversion of their Kanto cousins, because the island's legends tell of a sacred fire that would not burn, a story that shaped the very biology of the Pokémon around it. Every totem Pokémon is a symbol of this partnership. They are not wild in the usual sense. They are guardians chosen by the island's Tapas, the 4 guardian deities that watch over each island. Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Fini are not legendaries you capture after a long cave crawl. They are the voices of the islands themselves, and they do not yield their allegiance easily. To earn their respect, you must prove that you understand what it means to belong somewhere. This sense of belonging extends to the artificial heart of the region, Ether Paradise. Built on a man-made island, a sanctuary of white walls and clean laboratories floating off the coast of Akala, Ether Paradise is the headquarters of the Ether Foundation, an organization dedicated to the protection and conservation of Pokémon. At first glance, it seems like a benevolent institution, a place where abused or endangered Pokémon can heal. But Ether Paradise is also the birthplace of a mystery that will eventually tear the fabric of Alola's peace apart. For now, it stands as a reminder that even in a region founded on tradition and place, human ambition can create something outside the natural order. The 4 natural islands and this one artificial sanctuary form the complete geography of Alola. A region designed not around a linear path but around a circle. You can start on Melamela, work your way through the trials, island hop to Akala, then Ulaula, then Pony, but you always return to the starting point, the beach where you first arrived, the palm trees that welcomed you. The journey is not about reaching the end. It is about making each island a part of you, and that is why Alola feels so different from every region before it. It is not a place you pass through, it is a place that asks you to stay. The old pattern, defeat 8 gym leaders, collect 8 badges, challenge the Elite Four, come champion. That pattern was built on competition, on hierarchy, on proving yourself against others. Alola replaces that with communion. You do not prove yourself against the island, you prove yourself with it. But even in this serene, tropical world, something is watching from beyond. Something that does not belong to any island, natural or artificial. Something that will arrive not by sea or by sky, but through a hole in the sky itself. The calm of Alola is about to be broken, and the invasion that follows will test everything this region believes about partnership, about belonging, and about the fragile boundary between worlds. The Island Challenge replaced the gyms, and for the first time in the mainline games, the path to becoming champion was woven into the fabric of local tradition rather than a standardized league structure. You didn't just battle your way through 8 identical arenas. You completed trials that were unique to each island, facing totem Pokémon that were boosted by the aura of their environment. It felt like the region itself was testing you, not just a committee of trainers. And at the heart of that system, 4 guardian deities watched over the islands, the Tapu. They were not legendaries you could simply challenge and catch. They were the spiritual landowners, and you were a guest in their domain. That sense of being an outsider, of stepping into a world that did not revolve around the standard Pokémon League script, was the first hint that Alola was asking a deeper question. What happens when something from beyond arrives? Alola is defined by its isolation. The 4 islands rise from the middle of the ocean, cut off from the continents, where most of the known Pokémon world exists. That isolation bred a distinct ecosystem. You see it in the regional variants, the Alolan forms. When a Pokémon like Executor or Sandshrew finds itself separated from the mainland for generations, it adapts, not through arbitrary design, but through what we recognize as Darwinian selection. Sandshrew, originally a ground type, became ice and steel in Alola because its desert habitat was replaced by snowy mountains. Vulpix became ice type, pure white, because the volcanic landscape demanded a different survival strategy. For the first time, the games gave us a concrete lore reason for why a Pokémon looks different in one region versus another. It was not simply a palette swap. It was evolution in action, written into the world building. But the Tapu Guardians were not just protecting the islands from the inside. They were watching the sky, the sea, the very boundaries of reality. Because Alola, by its geography and its spiritual significance, sits on a thin place. The four Tapu, Koko, Lele, Bulu, and Fini, each preside over one island, and their role is explicitly to preserve the cultural and ecological sanctity of their territory. They are not aggressive by default, but they are deeply territorial. The trials you face are not just tests of strength. They are rites of passage that the Tapu themselves approve. When you clear an island's grand trial, you earn the right to approach the Guardian, to earn its respect. This is not a relationship of capture and control. It is one of mutual acknowledgement. Then came the rifts, the ultra wormholes, and with them, the invasion from beyond. The Ultra Beasts were not Pokémon in any traditional sense. They did not belong to any known egg group. They did not have type alignments that fit neatly into the existing chart. They arrived from a parallel dimension, and their very presence destabilized the ecological balance of Alola. Nihiligo, the first one encountered, is a jellyfish-like creature that parasitizes its host, merging with their consciousness. Buzzwole drains its victims of energy. Pheromosa moves so fast it leaves trails of destruction. These were not just dangerous Pokémon. They were invasive species on a cosmic scale, and the Tapu Guardians reacted. The game shows you glimpses of Tapu Koko confronting an Ultra Beast, trying to push it back. The system of guardian deities was never designed for interdimensional threats, but they adapted, because the cultural sanctity of the islands depends on keeping the boundaries intact. Ether Paradise, the artificial island that serves as the game's hub for conservation, was founded by Lusamine with the stated goal of protecting Pokémon from harm. But Lusamine's obsession with Ultra Beasts twisted that mission. She wanted to open the wormholes, to invite the invaders in, because she saw them as beautiful, as pure. She lost sight of the sanctity that the Tapu guarded. The player character, alongside the island guardians and the legendary Solgaleo or Lunala, becomes the counterweight. You are not just a trainer, you are the defender of a world that is suddenly porous. The Ultra Beasts are not villains in the traditional sense. They are simply beings from a different ecosystem, and their presence in Alola is a violation of the region's ecological contract. The Tapu Guardians represent something older than the League, older than the modern world. They are the memory of the islands before humans arrived. And when you finally face the Ultra Necrozma, the prismatic beast that drains all light, you understand that the invasion from beyond is not just a random event. It is the natural consequence of a world that has lost its reverence for boundaries. Alola, the region that broke the tradition of gyms, instead teaches you that tradition exists for a reason. The island challenge, the Tapu, the regional forms, everything is about identity shaped by place. And when that place is invaded, everything adapts or collapses. The Ultra Beasts subvert traditional regional ecology because they are not part of any ecology. They are anti-ecology. They are proof that the world of Pokémon is not closed. There are dimensions beyond, and they are hungry. And the Tapu Guardians, with their silent vigilance, are the only thing keeping the islands from being swallowed whole. This is where the pattern shifts. After Alola, the regions become more self-aware, more willing to examine their own myths and systems. The next step in this journey takes us to a land that builds its entire identity around industry and spectacle, where the invasion is not from beyond the stars, but from within the system itself. The Galar region, with its stadiums and its corporate league, will challenge everything you think you know about what a Pokémon region can be. The last chapter ended with the strange, otherworldly incursion of the Ultra Beasts into Alola, a reminder that some threats do not belong to any natural order the islands had known. The Tapu Guardians held the line, preserving a fragile balance between the human world and something far more alien. But after that, the series turned its toward a different kind of contradiction, one that lives not beyond the stars, but at the heart of a very human society. Galar is the region where the conflict between nature and industry is no longer an abstract myth. Here it is written into the very landscape, into the architecture of stadiums and the glow of city lights. This is a region designed to look like the United Kingdom, specifically Great Britain, with its rolling green hills, foggy moors, and Victorian-era towns. But the first thing you notice is that everything is built for a spectacle. The Pokémon League here is not a quiet climb through secluded gyms tucked away in forests or caves. It is a sport, a massive, televised, stadium-filling competition that draws crowds of thousands. The gym leaders are celebrities. Their battles broadcast live on enormous screens, and the champion, Leon, is a national hero whose face adorns billboards and merchandise. This is the glorification of the Sports Culture League, and it changes everything about how you experience the region. The routes are still there, but they often feel like corridors leading to the next stadium town. The world of Galar is polished, directed, and engineered to keep the audience engaged, and that includes the player. You are not just a trainer wandering into a gym. You are a participant in a grand athletic event. The game even adds a mascot. Your trainer wears a jersey with a number. The energy is electric, but also deliberately manufactured. But then there is the wild area. This is where Galar breaks its own pattern. The wild area is a vast open stretch of land that sits between the cities, free from the scripted gym challenge. You can wander here for hours, encountering Pokémon of wildly different levels, weather patterns shifting in real time, and hidden dens where Dynamax raids occur. It feels almost like a different game. For the first time in the main series, you have a sense of true scale, not just a connected series of routes, but a contiguous landscape that you can explore at your own pace. The wild area changed the player's perception of regional scale and freedom. It whispered that Pokémon could be more than a linear journey. It was a promise of what future games would become. Yet beneath the stadium lights and the sprawling fields, something ancient stirs. The region's mythology speaks of the darkest day, a cataclysm that occurred 3,000 years ago when a great darkness engulfed Galar and legendary Pokémon clashed in the heavens. That history is recorded in murals and songs, but it is also buried in the very soil of the region. The industrial progress of Galar, the train lines, the factories, the energy that powers the stadiums, sits directly on top of the slumbering forces that caused that ancient disaster. The game asks a quiet but insistent question. What happens when a society built on spectacle and progress ignores the sleeping threat beneath its foundations? It is no accident that the villain of this story, Chairman Rose, is not a criminal mastermind in the traditional sense. He is a businessman, a visionary who sees his plan as the logical culmination of human advancement. He wants to harness the power of the darkest day itself to secure Galar's energy future for the next 1,000 years. He does not act out of malice, but out of a belief that the ends justify the means. And in doing so, he nearly awakens the very disaster he seeks to control. The legendaries of this generation, Zacian and Zamazenta, are not creators or destroyers. They are guardians, ancient swords and shields that once quelled the darkness. Their return is not a new beginning, but a rebalancing. The wild area may have given you a taste of freedom, but the heart of Galar is a stage, and on that stage, the tension between what is built and what is buried plays out in real time. The next chapter will take us into the frozen reaches of the Crown Tundra and the mystic Isle of the Isle of Armor, two places that hold secrets even darker than the darkest day itself. Chapter 17, The Crown and the Armor. The Galar region we explored in the last chapter was a land of grand stadiums and roaring crowds, where Dynamax energy surged through the earth and turned Pokémon battles into spectacular sporting events. But that was only the surface. Beneath the gleaming industrial cities and the carefully manicured routes of the mainland, Galar holds secrets far older than its modern league culture. Streks buried in soil, stone, and the very currents of its geological history. And when Game Freak decided to expand Galar through 2 downloadable content packs, they didn't simply add new routes or a few extra Pokémon. They opened a door to the region's forgotten past, and in doing so, they revealed that Galar's identity is not just about spectacle, it is about reclamation. The first expansion, the Isle of Armor, and the second, the Crown Tundra, are not random additions. They are thematic extensions of Galar's core concept, a region built on the tension between natural energy and human ambition. The Isle of Armor is a training ground, a wild sanctuary, where Pokémon and trainers alike can grow stronger without the pressure of the league spotlight. It is a place of dojos and sparring, of rediscovering the primal bond between human and Pokémon. But the Crown Tundra is something else entirely. It is a frozen frontier, a land of snow and legend, where the region's most ancient history lies frozen beneath the ice. Together they complete Galar's story, not by adding more cities or gyms, but by restoring what was lost. And what was lost above all is the story of Calyrex. Long before the Galar region built its first stadium, before Dynamax energy was harnessed for battles, a Pokémon of immense power ruled these lands. Calyrex was a king, not in the human sense, but as a legendary figure who guided the people through times of hardship. According to the lore scattered across the Crown Tundra, Calyrex once saved the region from a terrible famine by using its abilities to make the soil fertile and the harvests plentiful. In return, the people revered it, building monuments and passing down tales of its wisdom. But as centuries passed, and as Galar industrialized, Calyrex faded into myth. Its crown, literally, the crown of its antlered head, became a symbol of a forgotten era, and its power was buried beneath the snows of the tundra. When the player arrives in the Crown Tundra, they are not simply exploring a new area, they are participating in an archaeological reclamation. The region's history, long suppressed by the march of modern progress, is unearthed piece by piece. You meet Peony, a former league chairman, who has turned his attention to finding legendary Pokémon hidden in the tundra. And through his expeditions, you learn that Calyrex's story is not just a legend. It is a missing chapter of Galar's identity. The reclamation is not just about finding a rare Pokémon. It is about restoring the balance between the land's natural heritage and the industrial spectacle that defines modern Galar, and that balance is deeply tied to Dynamax. Dynamax is not just a battle gimmick, it is a geological phenomenon, a product of the Earth's own energy. In Galar, there are places where the ground is charged with a special kind of power that wells up from deep underground, that causes Pokémon to grow to enormous size when exposed to it. This energy is not random. It flows through the land like a subterranean river, and the Galar region was built directly atop its currents. The wild area, with its shifting weather and open fields, is the most visible surface expression of this geological force. But the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra are also shaped by it. In the Isle of Armor, you find the Max Soup, a concoction that unlocks a Pokémon's potential to Gigantamax, a process that relies on the same Earth energy, refined through a dojo's discipline. In the Crown Tundra, you encounter Dynamax Pokémon in dens scattered across the frozen landscape. Their immense forms are testament to the energy that still pulses beneath the ice. What the DLC reveals is that Galar is a region built on a foundation of raw telluric power. The League stadiums are not just arenas, they are conduits designed to channel and control this energy for sport. The Industrial Revolution that shaped Galar's cities was powered by the same force that makes Pokémon grow, and yet the people of Galar had forgotten the source. They treated Dynamax as a spectacle, a feature of their battles, without understanding that it was a gift from the Earth itself. A gift that Calyrex once knew how to harness for the good of all. The Crown Tundra expansion culminates in a confrontation that brings this full circle. You can reunite Calyrex with its steed, either Glastria or Spectria, and in doing so, you restore the legendary king to its full power. The reclamation of lost regional history is not just a narrative beat, it is a mechanic. You literally help Calyrex reclaim its crown, its place as the guardian of Galar's ancient heritage. And when you face it in battle, you are not fighting a mere legendary. You are testing yourself against the embodiment of the land's memory. This is the deeper pattern at work in Pokémon regions. Each generation adds layers to its world building, and Galar's DLC is a masterclass in thematic expansion. The base game gave us the spectacle. The expansions give us the soul. They remind us that no matter how much a region modernizes, the earth remembers, the stone remembers, the ice remembers. And as we close this chapter on Galar, we turn our gaze to a new horizon, a land of vast open frontiers, where the very structure of the region is reimagined, where the past and the future collide in a sun-drenched landscape that calls out to be explored. But that is a story for the next chapter, when we step into the open fields of Paldea, after the Crown Tundra reclaimed its ancient king, restoring a lost chapter of Galarian history. The next region would not look back to the past, but forward to an entirely new kind of frontier. With Paldea, Game Freak made a decision that had been brewing for years, to abandon the traditional route-based map and hand the player complete freedom. This was the first truly open world in the main series, and it changed everything about how a Pokémon story could be told. Paldea is a land shaped by a single impossible feature. At its center, the great crater of Paldea yawns open like a wound in the earth, a mile-wide chasm that drops into darkness. This is Area Zero, a place the game's world treats as forbidden, dangerous, and sacred. The entire region radiates outward from this hole. The geography, the wildlife, the very culture of Paldea revolves around the mystery at its heart, and for the first time, the player is not led by the hand toward that mystery. You are told to find your own treasure. The treasure hunt is the framing device for Paldea's story. Instead of a single linear path from gym to gym, the player is given a school project. Go out into the world and discover what matters to you. You can challenge the 8 gyms in any order, or you can ignore them entirely. You can explore the vast deserts, forests, and mountains, encountering Pokémon that scale their levels to you. You can follow the story of the renegade professor, or you can spend hours cooking sandwiches in the sun. The narrative pacing becomes something you control, and that is both liberating and strange. For the first time, the main plot can wait. You might not even see the first hint of Area Zero until dozens of hours in. The crater looms on the map, tantalizing, but the game does not force you there. This is a deliberate inversion of older regions, where the legendary shrine or the villain's lair was placed along your path. In Paldea, the mystery is always present, but it is not urgent. The treasure you seek is personal. That design choice makes the world feel alive, but it also fragments the story into 3 separate threads. The Path of Legends, the Starfall Street Rebellion, and the Victory Road Gym challenge each unfold at your own pace, and only at the very end do they converge inside the crater. When you finally descend into Area Zero, the game changes its tone entirely. The bright, colourful landscape gives way to a crystalline abyss where time seems to stand still. The walls are lined with glowing Terra crystals, and the air hums with an ancient energy. Here you meet the Paradox Pokémon, creatures that should not exist according to the known timeline. Echoes of the past and future. You discover the truth of the Professor's obsession, the origin of the terrestrialization phenomenon, and the reason the crater was sealed. Area Zero is not just a dungeon, it is the thematic anchor of the entire region. It represents the frontier of knowledge, the dangerous edge of discovery. Paldea is a place built on the idea that exploration and curiosity are their own rewards, but that some truths come at a cost. The open world allows you to wander, but the story reminds you that not everything should be uncovered. The relationship between player agency and narrative consequence has never been more explicit in a Pokémon game. This is the pattern continuing and evolving. Paldea trades the linear lore of earlier regions for a map that asks you to find meaning yourself. The treasure hunt is not just a plot device, it is a philosophy. It tells you that the story is yours, even if the game still has a fixed ending. And that ending, hidden in the crater, opens a door to something even stranger. Something that violates the very flow of time itself. That story about the paradoxes of time is where we turn next. Paldea's open wilderness felt, for the first time, like a world you could truly get lost in. But the more you explored its sun-drenched fields and rocky canyons, the more one question kept pulling you toward the center. What really lies at the bottom of the Great Crater? That chasm in the middle of the region is not just a geographical feature. It is a wound in the earth and a doorway to something that breaks every rule the previous regions taught us. When you finally descend into Area Zero, the air changes. The light shifts from gold to an eerie ultraviolet glow, and the Pokémon you encounter there are not like any you've seen. They look familiar, but twisted by time itself. Some appear ancient, covered in primal scales and jagged teeth. Others seem futuristic, sleek and metallic, as if forged from a distant century. These are the Paradox Pokémon, creatures that should not exist in the same era. Yet, here they are, breathing the same air. This is where Paldea reveals its ultimate secret, the concept of regional evolution, which Alola introduced with its Alolan forms, and Galar deepened with its own variants, was always pointing toward this moment. Those earlier forms showed how a species adapts to a new environment. But what happens when the environment itself is a rift in time? The Paradox forms are not just ecological adaptations. They are evolutionary echoes from different ribbons of history. They are a commentary on the very idea of regional evolution, pushing the concept beyond mere climate and geography into the realm of temporal displacement. And beneath all of this, at the very core of Area Zero, lies the source of the distortion. Crystals. Not ordinary crystals, but ones that pulse with an internal light. This is the Terrastol phenomenon. The crystals that cover Paldea's surface, that you can find in every cave and cliff face, are not random minerals. They are shards of the planet's own crystalline core, a core that resonates with the energy of time itself. When a Pokémon terrastalizes, it is not simply changing type. It is being momentarily aligned with that primal core, its own crystal shell reflecting the deep rhythm of the earth. The Paradox Pokémon are not visitors from another dimension. They are manifestations of this rhythm, pulled from the past and future by the planet's own heartbeat. Paldea, then, becomes the ultimate synthesis of everything that came before. It has Kanto's sense of discovery, Johto's reverence for tradition, Hoenn's ecological balance, Sinnoh's mythic depth, Unova's urban reinvention, Kalos's elegance, Alola's cultural identity, and Galar's industrial spectacle. But it weaves them together under a single roof. The idea that a region is not just a place, but a story the Earth tells about itself. The open world is not just a design choice, it is a narrative necessity. You cannot understand Paldea without walking its every corner, because the pattern is hidden in the land itself. So when we ask what the hidden pattern behind every Pokémon region truly is, Paldea gives us the final answer. Each region is a different voice in a single conversation about time, change, and the endless cycle of adaptation. And if you listen closely, you can hear the next voice already rising. It will not be about geography or crystals or even time itself. It will be about the forces that try to break this cycle, the ambitions that distort evolution for their own ends. That story, the Evolution of Villainy, is the one we will follow next. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, What's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The terrestrial phenomenon that shimmers across Paldea is more than just a crystalline shell. It's a window into the planet's core, a reminder that every region hides a deeper truth beneath its surface. And just as Area Zero holds the key to Paldea's ancient and future paradoxes, every generation of Pokémon has buried its own secrets within the ambitions of its villains. Tonight, we trace the slow, deliberate evolution of evil, from the simple greed of a mafia to the desperate, world-altering convictions of students who thought they were saving everything. When Team Rocket first swaggered onto the screen in Kanto, they were a straightforward operation, a criminal syndicate in the classic sense, profiting from Pokémon theft, smuggling, and illegal experimentation. Their boss, Giovanni, was a gym leader by day and a crime lord by night. But his goal was never more complicated than power and money. He wanted to rule the world from the shadows, using Mewtwo as his ultimate weapon. There was no philosophy, no higher cause, only the raw desire to control. That simplicity made them feel real, like an underworld that could exist just beyond the edge of any city. But as the regions expanded, so did the motivations of those who opposed the player. Johto gave us Team Rocket's remnant, still clinging to Giovanni's legacy, but already the seeds of something more complex were being planted. Hoenn introduced teams Magma and Aqua, and here we saw the first major pivot. They didn't want to control the world for personal gain, they wanted to alter it. Maxi wanted to expand the land, Archie wanted to expand the sea. Their goals were ecological, even if misguided, and they were willing to summon legendary Pokémon to reshape the planet itself. This was the beginning of a shift from world domination to world alteration. Sinnoh pushed that transformation even further. Team Galactic, led by Cyrus, didn't just want a different world. He wanted to erase the world entirely and create one without emotion, without spirit. That's a philosophical horror, not a criminal one. Cyrus believed the universe was flawed, and he had the technology and the legendary Pokémon to unmake it. Compare that to Giovanni, who just wanted a bigger vault. The scale of the villain's ambitions had expanded to match the mythology of the region itself. Unova broke the pattern in a different way. Team Plasma, under the charismatic Getsis, disguised their agenda as a noble crusade for Pokémon liberation. They preached that Pokémon should be free from human trainers. But behind that rhetoric was a plan to seize all Pokémon for themselves. It was manipulation on a political level, blending ideology with tyranny. And then, in the sequels, we met the true face of the conflict. Not Getsis alone, but the shadow of a dragon that could reshape the region's history. That was when the secret boss began to reveal what lay buried beneath Unova's modern skyline. Kalos gave us Team Flare, whose leader Lysandre wanted to use the ultimate weapon to destroy most of the world in order to preserve its beauty. Again, not domination, alteration, preservation through destruction. Alola's Team Skull were a refreshing calm-down, a group of misfits and outcasts who were less world-threatening and more disillusioned, but even they were a symptom of a deeper problem. The corruption of the Ether Foundation, which hid its own secret boss in Luzamine, a mother driven to obsession by Ultra Beasts. And then came the true secret boss, the hidden history of Alola itself, revealed only through the aftermath. Galar's macrocosmos, led by Chairman Rose, was about energy crisis and a stubborn refusal to delay the future. He wanted to wake Eternatus to solve a problem decades away, and his secret boss, the dark history of Galar's darkest day, was only unlocked through the post-game lore. But the real masterpiece of this evolution came in Paldea. Team Star, at first glance, seems like a regression. They are students, not criminals. They form a group of misfits who rebelled against a bullying system, and their motivations are deeply personal. To protect their friends, to resist an unjust school policy. There is no world domination, no cosmic alteration. Their goal is simply to survive and to change the rules of their own small world. But beneath that lies the true secret boss of Paldea's history, the discovery of Area Zero, the paradox Pokémon and the revelation that the very professor who guided you was manipulating the past and future to rewrite the region's existence. That secret boss, whether it's the AI professor or the true intent behind the terror crystals, unlocks the real story of Paldea, a story about the dangers of trying to alter the world without understanding it. This pattern holds across every generation. The evil teams move from criminal enterprises to crusaders, from mafia to misunderstood students. Their motivations shift from seizing power to reshaping reality. And in every case, there is a hidden boss, a figure or a force, that reveals the true history of the region. In Kanto, it was Mewtwo, a secret experiment that showed the dark side of science. In Johto, it was the hidden rocket storyline in the radio tower. In Hoenn, it was the awakened legendary that exposed the balance of nature. In Sinnoh, it was Giratina and the Distortion world, revealing the full scope of creation. In Unova, it was the original dragon and the truth of the region's founding. In Kalos, it was the ultimate weapon and the war of 3,000 years ago. In Alola, it was the ultra-deep sea and the fall of the Ether Foundation. In Galar, it was the darkest day and the legendary heroes. And in Paldea, it was Area Zero and the paradoxes of time. These secret bosses are the keys. They are not just final challenges. They are revelations that reshape everything you thought you knew about the region's past, its legends, and its true nature. They ensure that the villain's journey is never just about stopping a bad person. It's about uncovering a hidden truth that the world itself has tried to bury. So as you drift, consider how every stone in every region might cover something far older than the path you walk. The landmarks we see, the towers, the craters, the forests, they are not just scenery. They are anchors for these hidden histories, waiting for someone to pull them up. And that is exactly where our journey turns next. When we explore how a single place can hold the weight of an entire region's story, and how the most unassuming landmark can become the narrative anchor that ties everything together. The Evolution of Villainy taught us something essential about the structure of a Pokémon region. The antagonist is never just a person or a team, but often a force anchored to a place. Team Galactic needed Mount Coronet. Team Aqua and Magma needed the Cave of Origin. Team Flare needed the ultimate weapon hidden beneath Geosenge Town. And when you trace that pattern backward, you realize that the geography itself was always the secret author of the story. The landmarks of a region do more than decorate the map. They act as narrative anchors, pulling the player toward moments of tension, revelation, and quiet dread. And among those anchors, none is more persistent than the one that makes you hesitate before entering. Every single mainline Pokémon region has a spooky location. Kanto has Lavender Town. Johto has the burned tower and later the Sinnoh ruins. Hoenn has the abandoned ship and the Sky Pillar. Sinnoh has the old chateau. Unova has the relic castle and the strange house. Kalos has the haunted Pokeball factory or the Chamber of Emptiness. Alola has the thrifty Megamart and the Lake of the Sun and Moan. Galar has the Glimwood Tangle and the Dusty Bowl. Paldea has the Tagtree Thicket and the ruins scattered across the desert. And the reason each region needs one goes beyond tradition. These places serve a psychological function. They introduce a tonal break. The player spends most of the adventure in landscapes that are bright, open, and encouraging. Routes are safe to traverse. Towns offer healing. Wild Pokémon are manageable challenges. But when you approach the Graveyard Tower or the abandoned mansion, the music changes, the lighting shifts, the air becomes still. The game is telling you that something here is different, that the rules of safety have been suspended. Lavender Town is the original spooky location, and it remains the most powerful example because it accomplishes something no other location quite replicates. It turns grief into architecture. The Pokémon Tower is a vertical structure rising above a town that otherwise lies flat and quiet. The player climbs upward through floors of memorials, each one filled with the graves of Pokémon, and the encounter with the ghost of a Marowak forces you to confront what the game usually hides. That death exists in this world, that the bond between trainer and Pokémon can be severed permanently. The tower is a narrative anchor because it changes how you see the entire region. After Lavender, Kanto feels haunted even in its sunny meadows. The memory of that tower lingers, and that verticality is essential. In a game world that is mostly horizontal, routes stretching east and west, towns connected by paths, a tower or a shrine forces the eye upward. It reminds you that the world has depth, that sacrats hide not just around corners but above you, waiting to be climbed. Johto's Bell Tower and the Tin Tower serve similar vertical purpose, but with a different emotional weight. They are not about death, but about absence. The legendary birds and the mythical Ho-Oh and Lugia are tied to these structures, and climbing them feels like ascending toward a covenant. The towers are ancient, weathered, and standing in defiance of time. The player does not simply walk into them. You must earn the right to climb, collecting the right items, solving puzzles, and proving your worth. The vertical ascent becomes a ritual. By the time you reach the top, you have already been changed by the journey, and the view from the summit is rarely just a view. It is a vantage point that recontextualizes the entire region below. You see the routes you traveled, the towns you visited, and the mountain you feared, all arranged in a pattern that makes sense only from above. That is the power of vertical storytelling in a horizontal world. It gives you perspective. Then there are the forbidden zones. Every region has at least one location the game warns you not to enter, or that feels hostile simply by existing. The Cave of Origin in Hoenn is the purest expression of this. It is the place where the ancient Pokémon slumbers, the heart of the region's ecological imbalance. The player is told to stay away. The game makes it clear that entering means facing forces beyond your control, and yet you must go there. The cave is dark, labyrinthine, and filled with a silence that feels deliberate. It is not a dungeon of action, but of atmosphere. You walk through it, knowing that the next room will change everything. That anticipation, that psychological weight, is what makes the Cave of Origin unforgettable. It is a landmark that exists not to be conquered, but to be endured. Area Zero in Paldea is a similar kind of forbidden zone, but it is updated for the open world era. The crater at the center of the region is visible from almost any high point. You can see it from the academy, from the cliffs of the eastern coast, from the top of the lighthouse, and the game tells you repeatedly that you cannot go there, not yet. The crater becomes a mystery that hangs over the entire adventure. Every time you pass near its edge, the game reminds you that something is waiting below. The Forbidden Zone is not just a location, it is a promise. It creates a vertical separation between the safe, sunlit world above and the unknown depths below. When you finally descend into Area Zero, the drop is not just physical, it is emotional. The music shifts to something alien. The colors drain. The Pokémon you encounter are not the familiar ones from the surface. They are paradoxes, creatures that should not exist in the same timeline. And the revelation that Area Zero is actually a scar in the planet's crust, a wound that holds the secret of Pokekind's origins, makes the entire region feel like a story written in the earth itself. The psychological impact of these forbidden zones is rooted in a simple human instinct. We are drawn to the places we are told to avoid. The game uses that instinct to anchor its most important narrative beats. The player does not need to be told that Mount Coronet is important. The mountain dominates the center of Sinnoh, visible from every route, and the game never lets you forget that it holds the key to the origin of the universe. The tower or shrine becomes a silent character, a presence that watches you progress. When you finally reach it, the story feels earned because you have been looking at that landmark for hours, and this pattern extends beyond the main story. The spooky locations and forbidden zones also serve as refuges for certain types of Pokémon. Ghost types, dark types, and psychic types often cluster in these areas, reinforcing the idea that the geography itself influences what creatures can be found. The old chateau in Sinnoh is not just a haunted house. It is a micro-habitat that supports a unique ecosystem of spirits and illusions. The player who searches there will find Rotom, Ghastly, and the legendary Swords of Justice. The location shapes the encounter, just as a cave shapes the water-dwelling Pokémon that live in its underground pools. Landmarks are narrative anchors because they give the player a reason to look up, to wonder and to feel small. In a world that is mostly flat and traversable by bike or foot, a tower or a shrine breaks the plane and demands attention. It tells you that the region has history, that something important happened here before you arrived, and it asks you to participate in that history by climbing, descending, or crossing into the forbidden. When you start to notice this pattern, you cannot unsee it. Every region has its lavender tower, its old chateau, its cave of origin. They are the places where the game slows down and asks you to feel something other than momentum. And those feelings, grief, fear, or mystery, are what turn a map into a memory. They are what make a region feel real, and they are why, even years later, you can still hear the music of Lavender Town in your head without having set foot in Kanto for a decade. But the landmarks are only half of the equation. The creatures that inhabit them, the way their forms and behaviours change from region to region, tell an even deeper story about how geography shapes life itself. Because if a tower can anchor a legend, then a regional form can anchor an entire ecology. And that is exactly what we will explore next. The previous chapter left us standing at the foot of a tower, staring upward at a spire that seemed to pierce the sky itself. We talked about how landmarks like Lavender Town or the Old Chateau serve as narrative anchors, vertical intrusions into an otherwise horizontal journey, places where the world holds its breath. But what about the world's surface? What about the ground beneath our feet, the air we breathe, the water that carves islands out of continents? If towers are the vertical storytelling of Pokémon, then regional forms are the horizontal storytelling. The slow, patient, biological conversation between a Pokémon and its home. You may have noticed that across Alola, Galar, Hisui, and Paldea, Pokémon don't always look like they did in Kanto. A sandshrew that once curled into a ball of brown scales now wears a coat of ice plates. A Vulpix that burned with fire now breathes a pale, frosty breath. These aren't mere palette swaps or gimmicks. They are living proof that a Pokémon's environment is not just a backdrop, it is a sculptor. And when we trace the hidden pattern of biological adaptation across these regions, we begin to see that Pokémon are not immutable creatures fixed in a Pokédex entry forever. They are fluid. They are reactive. They are, in the truest sense, part of an ecosystem that breathes and changes just as the world does. Why do Pokémon change based on their environment? The answer begins with the simplest force in nature: pressure. Not the pressure of a waterfall, but the pressure of survival. In Alola, the tropical climate is warm and humid, filled with volcanic soil and dense jungle foliage. An Executor that once stood modest and upright in Kanto now towers like a palm tree, its neck stretching toward the sun because the shade of the canopy demanded it. It didn't just change its appearance, it changed its entire ecological niche. The Alolan Executor is not a variant, it is a different kind of life. The same is true for Marowak, whose bones in Alola burn with a ghostly flame. The lore whispers that these Marowak underwent their transformation out of sorrow. But the deeper pattern suggests something else. The environment shaped not just the body, but the spirit. In a region surrounded by volcanic activity and ancient burial grounds, the line between life and death grows thin. The Pokémon adapted to that thinness. Now let's move to Galar, and the pattern deepens. Industrial Britain, with its coal mines, steam-powered cities, and sprawling railways, created a different kind of pressure. Galarian wheezing isn't just a different colour. Its smokestacks have become literal chemical factories, filtering toxins from the air. Galarian Corsola doesn't just look pale, it is dead, a ghostly remnant of coral bleached by pollution. The environment of Galar is not a natural landscape. It is a landscape shaped by human ambition, and so the Pokémon adapted not to the sun or the soil, but to the smoke, the soot, the clang of industry. The same with Galarian Farfetch, who wields a leek like a sword because the competitive fighting culture of Galar forced it to develop a warrior's stance. This is world building at its most elegant. A region's theme, spectacle, sport, industry, becomes a filter through which every creature must pass. But perhaps nowhere is the pattern more explicit than in Hisui, the ancient Sinnoh. Here the world is still raw and untamed. The environment is harsh, frozen and dangerous. Hisuian Zoroark, once a dark type, became a ghost and normal type. Why? Because in Hisui, where the line between the living and the spirits is blurred by the region's connection to the creation myth, a Zoroark had to hide not from hunters, but from the very forces of nature that sought to erase it. Hisuian Decidui, once a ghost type, lost its ghostly aspect and became a fighting type, because in the wilds of Hisui there is no time for subtlety, only survival. And Hisuian Voltorb, an object that in modern times looks like a Pokeball, in Hisui looked like a wooden ball carved by the region's early inhabitants. The environment didn't just shape biology, it shaped origin. The Pokeball itself is an invention. In Hisui, before that invention, Voltorb was something else entirely. The pattern reveals that Pokémon are not just creatures of nature, they are creatures of history. Their forms carry the memory of the land. Then comes Paldea, the most recent evidence of this ecological design. In Paldea, Tauros with 3 different forms, each tied to a distinct breed adapted to the region's varied terrain. The combat breed, the blaze breed, and the aqua breed. Their horns glow with different energies. Their habitats are not random. They are tied to the specific geography of the crater and surrounding plains. And then there are the Paldean Wooper, which lost its water typing and became a poison type, because the ancient soil of Paldea is rich in toxic minerals. Wooper didn't just change for fun. It changed because the water in Paldea's rivers is laced with the remnants of territorial chemicals. The region itself forced the adaptation. What emerges from this pattern is a hidden world-building tool that Game Freak has quietly perfected over generations. Regional forms are not just collectible variants. They are proof that each region is a living, breathing ecosystem. When you encounter an Alolan Geodude, you are not merely seeing a rock Pokémon with a different colour. You are seeing the effect of volcanic minerals on crystalline structure. When you see a Galarian Zigzagoon, you are not just seeing a darker coat. You are seeing the result of urban evolution, where speed and cunning replaced brute force. Hisui's Pokémon show us what the world looked like before human interference. Paldea's Pokémon show us what the world looks like when it has been touched by time and disaster. Every regional form tells a story of migration, isolation and adaptation, but there is a deeper layer here. These forms also suggest that Pokémon are not static species. They are dynamic, evolving not just through levels and evolution stones, but through the slow, patient pressure of the world itself. This is ecology as narrative. The pattern teaches us that the environment is the most powerful character in any story because it defines every other character that lives within it. Think about what this means for the way the Pokémon world. Kanto's Pokémon are the baseline, the originals, but even they were shaped by their own environment. The wild grasses of Kanto, the caves of Mount Moon, the urban sprawl of Saffron City. These are all environments that left their mark. But as the series expanded, the designers began to wonder, what would a Sandshrew look like if it lived on a volcano? What would a Vulpix become if it grew up in a frozen tundra? The answers are the regional forms we now treasure. And yet, there is one more twist in this hidden pattern. If regional forms are the result of environment, then what does that say about the regions themselves? Could it be that each region is not just a different place, but a different chapter in the same long history of the Pokémon world? Could the environment change because time itself has changed? That question leads us to the next layer of the hidden pattern. The mythology that underpins all of these landscapes. Because if the environment shapes Pokémon, then something shaped the environment. And that something is older than any region, older than any human settlement, older than the Pokeball itself. That something is the foundation of every story. the reason why the world is the way it is. And in our next chapter, we will step into the shadow of that foundation. We will move from the surface of the land into the depths of time. We will trace the origins of the myths that built the regions, the legends that gave birth to the first Pokémon. The timeline that runs beneath all of this, that is next, the Mythological Timeline. So after spending an entire chapter exploring how Pokémon adapt to their environments through regional forms, we've seen that biology is shaped by place. But what about history? What about the deep past that predates every region's current borders, every gym, every league? Because if Pokémon change across geography, the stories they carry also shift. And those stories, the myths, the ancient wars, the creation events, they don't exist in a vacuum. They echo through every region, but each place hears a different echo. Let's try to construct a unified history of the Pokémon world, starting from the very beginning. The earliest known event is the birth of Arceus, who emerged from an egg in a void of nothingness. From there, Arceus created Dialga, Palkia and Giratina to govern time, space and antimatter. Then came the Lake Trio, Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf, to give knowledge, emotion and willpower to the world. This is the creation myth that Sinnoh holds most sacred, recorded on tablets and etched into the pillar-like structures of Spit Pillar atop Mount Coronet. But here's the thing, that myth is not universal. In Johto, the earliest legends speak not of a cosmic egg, but of the burning and frozen towers at Ecological, where 3 unnamed Pokémon perished in a fire and were resurrected by Ho-Oh. That story doesn't contradict Sinnoh's creation myth. It just begins later. It starts with a shared human tragedy, not with the birth of the universe. This is the first clue that a single timeline exists, but each region filters it through local folklore. The same cosmic event might be remembered as the day the sky split in one culture, and as the storm that brought the first rain in another. For example, the war between Groudon and Kyogre, that ancient battle that shaped Hoenn's land and sea, is entirely absent from Sinnoh's records. Yet both regions are on the same planet. How does that work? Easy. Hoenn's legends are about environmental balance. Sinnoh's are about the fabric of reality. Different cultures emphasize different aspects of the same world's history, and this pattern holds for every generation. Now, the most intriguing recurring trope in this fragmented timeline is the ancient war. Over and over, references to a catastrophic conflict that reshaped borders, erased civilizations, and left ruins that later regions build upon. In Kalos, the ultimate weapon was built by King Aze over 3,000 years ago, a war triggered by the loss of his Floette. That war not only ended the fighting, but also created the first known Mega Evolution energy, a literal wound in the earth that became the mysterious stones found all over the region. In Galar, the darkest day was a cataclysm, caused by a concentration of Galar particles, leading to the awakening of Eternatus. That event reshaped the region's geography, creating the slumbering weald and the wild area. In Paldea, the Great Crater, Area Zero, was formed by a mysterious impact or crystal emergence, and that event is tied to the ancient civilization that once lived within it. And we can't forget the war that destroyed the original tower in Lacanossa town of Unova, or the conflict that split the land bridge between Kanto and Johto, creating the Sevi Islands. None of these wars are the same war, but they follow a pattern. Some great calamity occurs. It leaves a scar on the land, a tower, a crater, a forest, a chasm, and that scar becomes a landmark that later civilizations treat as sacred or dangerous. And here's the deeper connection. The borders of modern regions are often drawn around these scars. The Sinnoh region is ringed by mountains that were once a single range, broken by an ancient event. The Galar region is bisected by a series of tunnels and towers that were built to contain the energy of the darkest day. The very shape of Hoenn is defined by the tug-of-war between Groudon and Kyogre. So the repeated ancient war is not just lore, it's a world builder's tool. It explains why regions look the way they do, why some areas are impassable, and why certain ruins are forbidden. But perhaps the most powerful effect of this pattern is how it lets each region interpret the same cosmic events through its own local folklore. Take the legendary birds of Kanto, Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres. In Kanto lore, they are just powerful Pokémon that control weather. But in Alola, the regional birds Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, Tapu Fini are guardians of entire islands, worshipped as deities. The difference isn't that Alola's legendaries are stronger, it's that Alola's culture deifies them, whereas Kanto's treats them as rare animals. Same species, no, different species altogether. But the way a region tells its story changes the role those Pokémon play in history. This is true for the creation trio too. In Sinnoh, Dialga and Palkia are cosmic forces. In Hisui, they were seen as rampaging gods that needed to be tamed. In Alola, the concept of time and space is less abstract and more tied to the sun and moon cycles. So when you look at the timeline of the Pokémon world, you're not looking at one story, you're looking at many stories, layered on top of each other, each one true in its own context. So how do we construct a unified history from all this? We don't need to force every legend into a single chronology. Instead, we need to recognize that the Pokémon world has a deep history that is experienced locally. The ancient war is a trope, not a date, but there is a pattern. Each generation introduces a new piece of that history, and those pieces can be assembled like a puzzle that doesn't quite fit together cleanly. That's okay. The beauty of the mythological timeline is that it invites speculation. Maybe all those ancient wars are echoes of the same event, filtered through different cultural lenses. Maybe the ultimate weapon in Kalos and the darkest day in Galar are caused by the same underlying phenomenon. Excess energy from the creation of the Pokémon world itself. And maybe the professor who studies this, the top researcher in each region, is the one who helps us connect those dots. Up next, we look at the role of that professor, how each generation's lead researcher, from Oak to Kukui to Magnolia to Sada and Turo, serves as our guide through these fragmented histories, how they interpret the same cosmic events through their own regional perspective, and why in the end, the professor might be the most important myth maker of all. And so the ancient wars that shape the Pokémon world's borders, the mythic timelines we traced from Arceus onward, all of that history is meaningless without someone to record it, to interpret it, and to hand it to a 10-year-old with a bicycle. That someone is the professor. Every region has one, but they are not interchangeable. Each professor is a carefully crafted reflection of the generation's core theme, a guide who embodies the very thesis statement the region is built upon. Think about it. The first professor we ever met, Samuel Oak, was fundamentally a classifier. His life's work was the Pokédex, a device that catalogues, organizes, and names every creature in existence. Kanto's theme was foundation. Yes, but more specifically, it was about making the unknown known. Oak gave you the tools to understand the world by sorting it into neat boxes. He was the perfect mentor for a player stepping into a brand new universe. But then came Professor Elm in Johto. Elm's focus shifted from pure classification to hatching, to breeding, to the continuity of life. Johto is the region of history and tradition, where the past literally connects to Kanto. And Elm is the professor who studies how Pokémon come into being, how they pass down moves and traits through generations. He is not just sorting what exists, he is looking at what persists across time. His research mirrors Johto's deep-seated respect for lineage and legacy. Hoenn brought us Professor Birch. And Birch, he is the field researcher, the one who studies Pokémon in their natural habitats. Hoenn's theme is ecology and balance, a world of oceans, volcanoes and weather systems. Birch does not stay in his lab. He is out in the tall grass, observing how Pokémon interact with their environment. He even gets attacked by a wild Pokémon right at the start, forcing you to choose a starter, not in a sterile lab, but in the middle of a living, breathing ecosystem. His thesis is that Pokémon cannot be understood apart from their surroundings, which is exactly the lesson Hoenn wants to teach. Then we arrive at Sinnoh and Professor Rowan. Rowan is older, gruffer, more traditional. He studies Pokémon evolution, not just the change from one form to another, but the very process of becoming. Sinnoh is the generation of creation myths, of gods who shaped time, space and matter. Rowan's focus on evolution, on the transformation at the core of all life, matches the region's obsession with origins. He even has a line about how every Pokémon carries the potential for something greater, which is basically a philosophical statement about Sinnoh's legendary trio. Unova breaks the pattern by introducing Professor Juniper. Unova is the region of reinvention, a cultural reset after Sinnoh's dense mythology. Juniper is the first female professor. She is younger, more energetic, and she studies the origins of Pokémon, but not through fossils or creation stories. She studies how Pokémon and humans first began coexisting. This fits Unova's theme of a fresh start, a new world where the relationship between trainer and partner is re-examined from the ground up. She even sends you on a journey to fill the Pokédex, not as a completionist exercise, but as a way to document the bond between species. Kalos gave us Professor Sycamore. Kalos is all about beauty, elegance, and the power of transformation. Sycamore studies Mega Evolution, a mechanic that changes a Pokémon's appearance and power through a bond of trust. He is suave, fashionable, and his lab is a sprawling mansion. He represents the idea that knowledge can be an art form, that science and grace are not opposites. His research into Mega Evolution is the key to Kalos's central conflict, the very thing Lysandre wants to harness for his twisted vision of eternal beauty. Alola's Professor Kukui is a study in place and community. He does not even call himself a professor in the traditional sense. He is a researcher who focuses on regional Pokémon moves and the unique culture of the islands. Alola's theme is local identity, and Kukui embodies that by living among his subjects, by incorporating traditional trials instead of gyms, and by being the first professor to actually battle alongside you. He is less a lecturer and more a fellow traveller, because Alola is about learning through experience, not instruction. Galar gave us Professor Magnolia, who studies the phenomenon of Dynamax and the energy that flows through the region's power spots. Galar is about industrial modernity and spectacle, and Magnolia is a pragmatic scientist who hands off much of the field work to her granddaughter Sonia. This generation's professor is almost a background figure, because the region's thesis is that progress and fame come from the arena, not the laboratory. Even the legendary Pokémon are tied to the energy grid. And finally, Paldea's professors, Sada and Turo, represent the culmination of this pattern. Their focus is temporal research, the study of ancient and future forms of Pokémon. Paldea's theme is the very idea of regional evolution, the paradox of time pushing creatures forward while pulling them back. The professor here is not just a guide. They are a tragic figure whose obsession with the past and future causes the entire conflict of the game. They are the first professor whose research becomes the villain's tool, because Paldea asks what happens when a region's thesis statement, that Pokémon adapt through time, is taken to its logical, dangerous extreme, from Oak's classification to Sada and Turo's manipulation of time itself. Every professor is a lens through which the region's most fundamental question. They are not just quest givers. They are living embodiments of the generation's core theme, the first voice that whispers what this world is really about. And as you travel through each region, you are not just catching Pokémon. You are following their thesis, step by step, until the final legendary encounter proves them right or forces them to reconsider. That pattern becomes even clearer when you listen to the music that accompanies each professor's lab, because the soundtrack of a region is not just background noise, it is a map of its soul, and the way the music changes across generations tells its own story, one that we will trace next in the chapter on the music of the map. In the last chapter, we saw how each region's professor became a window into that generation's soul. Oak with his quiet classification, Elm with his gentle curiosity about eggs, Juniper with her focus on origins, Sada and Turo with their dangerous obsession with time. But what if I told you there is another voice in every region, one that speaks without words, one that you've heard so many times you might have stopped noticing it entirely. That voice is the soundtrack. Think of the moment you first set foot in a new Pokémon region. You're remembering the look of the grass, the shape of the starter's house, but you're also remembering a melody. That melody is not random. It is a deliberate map of sound, designed to tell you where you are before you even see a single landmark. The hidden pattern behind every Pokémon region is that its music is not just background noise, it is a fingerprint. And as the regions evolved from Kanto's simple chiptune doodles to Paldea's sweeping orchestral scores, the music itself began to reflect something deeper. The geography, the culture, the very identity of the place. Let's start at the beginning. Kanto's soundtrack was composed by Junichi Masuda on limited hardware, 4 channels, 8-bit sounds. Yet even within those constraints, the music painted a world. The bicycle theme is bright and urgent. The cycling road feels like a ribbon of asphalt winding through a green countryside. The Viridian Forest theme hums with a low, insect-like buzz that still makes you feel closed in by trees. Those early tracks are simple, yes, but they already use instrument choice to suggest location. A flute for a peaceful route, a quick electric pulse for a city. The limitation was also a language. Then Johto arrived. The Game Boy Color allowed a little more texture, and Masuda leaned into it. Johto's themes carry a warmth that Kanto never had. The National Park theme uses a playful woodwind melody that sounds almost like a folk dance. Ecological City's music evokes old, creaking wooden towers and the whisper of kimono fabric. The developers didn't just make music, they made a sonic map of a region steeped in tradition. But it was Hoenn that truly opened the floodgates of cultural instrumentation. The Game Boy Advance had more channels, and the composers seized the opportunity. Hoenn's region is defined by water, by weather, by the primal forces of nature. The route themes often use steel drums and marimbas, giving a tropical island feel that matches the real-world inspiration of Kyushu, Japan, but with a warmer, more oceanic twist. The ocean music, the diving theme, the surfing theme. There's these bubbling synth waves that make you feel submerged. The soundtrack isn't just music, it's geography you can hear. Sinnoh took this further. With the Nintendo DS, composers could use richer samples. The region's mythical weight demanded something grander. The theme for Mount Coronet uses deep strings and a choir, echoing the sense of sacredness, of climbing toward the heavens. Jubilife City's theme is bright, but carries a note of mystery, as if the city is just a stage for something ancient beneath the streets. And the route themes, especially in the snowy areas, use shivering bells and sparse piano, creating a sonic landscape of cold isolation. Then came a turning point, Unova, the first region not based in Japan, but in New York City, and the music transformed accordingly. The composers wove in jazz syncopation, hip-hop beats, electric guitars with a raw edge. The route themes are more urban, more layered. Castelia City's theme is a pulsating rhythm of city life, with sirens and train sounds woven into the melody. The regional identity was no longer just in the visuals, it was in the groove. Unova's soundtrack shouts that this is a new world, a new century, a new sound for Pokémon. Kalos followed with a clear French inspiration. The music turned to accordion, harpsichord, and sweeping waltz rhythms. Lumio City's theme is a masterpiece of café elegance and Baroque architecture in audio form. The roots are gentle and pastoral, with lutes and recorders that evoke the French countryside. And the legendary themes, Xerneas and Yveltal, use choral voices that feel cathedral-like, as if the music itself is a stained glass window. Alola brought the islands to life with ukulele, steel guitar, and ocean sounds. The daytime themes are warm, lazy, drenched in sunlight. The nighttime themes hum with a gentle island sway. And then there is the ancient music, the Trials, the Tapu Guardians, which use indigenous percussion and deep, resonant drums, pulling from Polynesian culture. This is a region that wants you to feel the sand between your toes, the breeze in your palm, and the pulse of a community bound by tradition. Galar shifted to a massive industrial scale. The stadium themes are bombastic, with marching drums and brass fanfares that sound like a football anthem. The wild area uses electronic beats and a driving bass line, conveying the vast, open, grassy plains of the British countryside. Ballinlee's forest is illuminated by fairy lights and a whimsical celesta melody, and the champion theme, that triumphant orchestral explosion, makes you feel like you're standing in a stadium filled with thousands of cheering fans. Galar's music is spectacle itself. Paldea finally is a fusion. The open world demands a shift away from linear route themes toward a more ambient, evolving score. The music adapts to time of day, to weather, to the biome you're in. The desert has a flamenco-inspired guitar. The snowy mountains use a mournful violin. The seaside cliffs feature a whistling melody that feels like a sailor's tune. And the soundtrack is layered with a recurring leitmotif, a theme for the region itself, which appears in different forms in the towns, the battle music, and the memories of the past. It ties the whole region together like a thread. This brings us to the hidden pattern. Every Pokémon region shares a few musical DNA strands. The Pokémon Center theme, for instance, has been remixed and reimagined in every generation, but its core notes remain. The victory fanfare, that 8-bit spark, has become a shorthand for triumph across 2 decades, and the gym leader battle themes themselves follow an arc. From simple energetic loops in Kanto to complex, multi-movement orchestral pieces in Galar and Paldea. That is the shift from chiptune simplicity to symphonic scale. The music grew up as the regions grew up, but the most beautiful part is this. The music does not just reflect the region, it reinforces the region's identity. When you hear a flute in Johto, you feel old roads. When you hear a steel drum in Alola, you feel the ocean. When you hear a harpsichord in Kalos, you feel elegance. Game Freak and the sound team have understood that the most direct path to a player's sense of place is through their ears, and they have woven culture, geography, and emotion into every note. So next time you hear a route theme, listen for the instruments. They are not random, they are the map's heartbeat. And just as the professors guided you through the region's mechanics, the music guides you through its soul. Now, as we prepare to leave the known regions and look toward what lies beyond the borders of familiar maps, consider this. The music of the next world will have to tell an even bigger story. How do you score a region that spans not just a country, but a global perspective? The answer may be hidden in the patterns we have just traced. After Chapter 25, we listen to how each region's music drew from its real-world counterpart. The shamisen in Johto, the steel drums of Alola, the bagpipes of Galar. But that musical shift was only one layer of a much deeper transformation. The moment the Pokémon series decided to step outside Japan was the moment it redefined what a region could actually mean. For the first 4 generations, home was a Japanese concept mapped onto a fictional world. Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh were all based on real Japanese regions, reimagined with Pokémon ecosystems layered on top. It gave the early games an intimate, almost familiar sense of place. But by 2010, that familiarity had started to feel like a limitation. The developers knew they had to expand the canvas, so they turned their eyes to the other side of the planet. Why the series moved away from Japan-based settings after Generation 4 is a question that reveals the franchise's hidden ambition. It wasn't just about variety, it was about thematic reinvention. Unova, inspired by New York City, needed to feel like a modern urban hub, a place where skyscrapers cast long shadows and the subway carried you between neighborhoods that each had their own personality. That meant translating the chaos of Manhattan into a Pokémon game. How do you capture the energy of Times Square without overwhelming? How do you represent the diversity of a global city through characters and gym leaders? The result was a region built on ambition, reinvention, and the idea that the future is always under construction. But the challenges of translating real-world cultures into Pokémon were not limited to Unova. Kalos demanded a different kind of translation. France is not just a country, it is a mood, a philosophy of elegance and art and history. The designers had to decide which parts of French culture to highlight. The ornate palaces, the sweeping boulevards, the quiet countryside that inspired painters. They had to find the Pokémon equivalent of a Parisian cafe, a Provençal lavender field, a medieval cathedral, and they did it, but not without careful consideration of every detail, from the shape of a city fountain to the name of a Lumiose cafe. Hawaii, the heart of Alola, was perhaps the most sensitive challenge. The islands are not just a vacation destination. They are the ancestral home of a deep living culture. The developers had to learn about the concept of the importance of guardian spirits, the way the land itself is seen as a sacred relative. They turned that into the tapu, into the trial system, into the very structure of the region, being 4 natural islands plus 1 artificial one. Alola became a place where community mattered more than badges, and where the journey felt less like a conquest and more like a welcome home. Galar, with its British inspiration, leaned into the spectacle of industrial heritage and the modern obsession with competitive sports. The gyms became stadiums, the train lines linked industrialized cities, and the story itself revolved around a legend of a hero who tamed a monster, a clear nod to the Arthurian mythos. The challenge here was making a region feel both historical and hyper-modern. How do you have a steam engine and a giant floating energy crisis at the same time? The answer lay in the contrast between the quiet countryside of the wild area and the roaring stadium of Hammerlock. Then came Paldea, inspired by the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. This time the challenge was to capture the sense of open exploration, of sun-drenched fields and coastal villages, of a place where the past and present coexist in olive groves and ancient ruins. The regional forms of Pokémon here told stories of adaptation to a warmer, drier climate, and the academy structure made the player feel like a student of the world itself. Through all of these experiments, the franchise learned something profound. How global settings have broadened the franchise's definition of home. Home is no longer a single town where Professor Oak calls you by name. Home is the sound of the tide on Melemele Island. Home is the neon glow of Castelia City at midnight. Home is the scent of baking bread in a Galarian kitchen, the warmth of a hearth in a Paldean vineyard. The regions stopped being backdrops and started becoming characters in their own right. They gave us a world that felt as big and diverse as our own, yet still wrapped in the comforting familiarity of a Pokémon battle at sunset. This global expansion was not without its risks. Every new region had to balance authenticity with the inherent fantasy of the Pokémon universe. But the result is a rich tapestry that invites players from every corner of the real world to see themselves reflected in the digital landscape. The journey from Kanto to Paldea is more than a geographical progression. It is a deliberate, thoughtful expansion of what it means to belong. And as the regions grew more aware of their own identities, they also began to turn their gaze inward, asking questions about the very nature of the world they inhabit. That self-awareness, that moment when a region starts to examine its own myths and its own origins, is where the most fascinating storylines lie. We will step into that mirror next, when the world of Pokémon expanded beyond the Japanese archipelago into the streets of New York, the boulevards of Paris, and the islands of Hawaii. Something shifted not just in geography, but in the very fabric of how these regions told their stories. The global expansion gave Game Freak a new palette of cultural textures, but it also unlocked a deeper, more introspective layer of world building. After generations of building outward, the games began to turn inward. They started to look back at their own mythology, not merely to honor it, but to question it. This is the moment the regions became self-aware. You might have felt it first in Unova, where Team Plasma's rhetoric about Pokémon liberation questioned the very core of the trainer-Pokémon bond we had accepted since Kanto. Or perhaps it was in Alola, where the trial system and the absence of a traditional gym challenge acknowledged that the formula could be bent. But the most profound turning point came when the series decided to revisit its oldest, most sacred creation myth, not with reverence, but with a scalpel. That was the purpose of Pokémon Legends. Arceus. On the surface, Hisui is just Sinnoh, before it was Sinnoh. A rugged, untamed landscape where Mount Coronet rises as it always has, but the settlements are sparse, the people are fearful, and the Pokémon are wild in a way we had never seen. Yet this region is not simply a prequel map, it is a mirror. The game forces you to re-examine everything you thought you knew about the legends of Sinnoh. The noble Pokémon, the space-time distortions, even Arceus itself. All of these were introduced in Generation 4 as static, almost religious lore. But Legends, Arceus does something radical. It puts you inside that lore, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant rewriting the story. The player character is thrown back in time, and the region responds. It becomes a place where the boundaries between myth and history dissolve, where every hill and river is a living footnote to a legend you are helping to construct. This is the hidden pattern. The regions have been evolving from simple exploration zones into self-referential narrative constructs. They no longer just host an adventure. They comment on the very idea of a Pokémon adventure. The transition from exploring a map to deconstructing a legend is subtle but unmistakable. In Kanto, you walk through roots and caves, and the world simply was. In Hisui, you walk through the same geography, but you know its future. The towns that will rise, the gym challenges that will be built, the Pokémon that will become common. That knowledge changes the experience. The map becomes a palimpsest, layered with history that you are simultaneously uncovering and creating. Legends. Arceus looks back at established lore and subverts it by making the player the author. The legend of the creator Pokémon, once a distant cosmic event, is now personal. You are chosen by Arceus. You meet Dialga and Palkia not as legendary statues, but as forces that tear reality apart. The plates that describe the Pokémon world's origins are not found in a temple. You assemble them yourself. This is metatextual in the truest sense. The game acknowledges that the region's mythology was always a constructed narrative, and now you hold the pen. But this self-awareness is not confined to the Sinnoh revisit. Look at how Galar frames its legend. The darkest day, the heroes, the sword and shield. These are presented as a story that everyone believes, but the game reveals the cracks in that story, showing that legend and truth are not the same. Or consider Kalos, where the ultimate weapon and the war 3,000 years ago are kept vague, almost as if the region is deliberately hiding its own history. The regions have become self-aware of their own fictionality. They know they are collections of stories, and they invite us to question those stories. Even the way we interact with the map has changed. In the early generations, the map was a tool for navigation, a checklist of towns and routes. In Legends, Arceus, the map is a field journal. You fill it with observations. You decide where to throw a Pokéball, where to catch a Pokémon, where to complete a research task. The region is not a static backdrop, it is a cooperative manuscript. This shift from passive exploration to active interpretation is the hidden pattern that runs through the later regions. Culminating in Hisui, the player is no longer just a trainer. They are a historian, a cartographer, a mythographer. What does this mean for the future of the Pokémon world? If the regions are becoming more self-referential and metatextual, where can the pattern go next? The answer lies in the very nature of the pattern itself. Once a region learns to look at its own legends, the next logical step is for it to look at the framework that contains all regions, the games themselves. That is the threshold we are approaching. The next chapter in this story, the one that follows the self-aware region, will examine how the Pokémon universe might turn its gaze outward, toward the very structure that holds it together. It will be an exploration of the future of the pattern, and the possibilities are as vast as the distortion tunnels that connect time and space. But for now, rest in the knowledge that the maps we once saw as simple landscapes are in truth layered with meaning, and every route you walk is also a path through a legend. We have traced the hidden pattern across every region, from Kanto's foundational simplicity to the self-aware mythology of Hisui. Now the final question emerges, not from the past, but from the horizon. What happens when the pattern itself becomes a conscious artifact? When the designers look back at their own creation and decide to write the next thesis statement with full knowledge of all that came before, the 10th generation and everything beyond it will not simply add another region to the list. It will have to answer a challenge that no previous generation faced. How do you build a region that feels fresh when the template is now fully exposed? The pattern has been studied, dissected, and loved by millions. Players now recognize the rhythm of a new region, the starter choices, the gym leaders, the legendary duo, the villain team, with an ideology tied to the local landscape. To break that rhythm would alienate the faithful, but to repeat it without evolution would disappoint them. The solution lies not in abandoning the pattern, but in deepening it. Consider the trajectory. Each region has become more self-aware. Unova reset the geographic arc. Kalos layered elegance onto the map. Alola turned the islands into a living cultural ecosystem. Galar made the League a televised spectacle. Paldea opened the world into a seamless playground. And Hisui looked back at the very origins of the pattern and asked, what if the pattern had not yet been codified? That kind of retroactive invention is a powerful tool. The next region could push even further into the metatextual. Imagine a region that is explicitly aware of its own history within the Pokémon world. A region that has archaeological digs uncovering ancient Pokeballs from generations past. Or a region whose legendary Pokémon are not simply mythical beings, but the personification of the player's own journey across the series. A thesis statement about the act of playing Pokémon itself. Or perhaps the future lies in a region that redefines the very concept of a thesis statement. Instead of one dominant theme, the next generation could offer multiple thematic layers depending on how you explore. The open world of Paldea was a step toward that, but the story still funneled you along a path. A truly self-aware region might let you choose which core idea you want to experience first. Ecology, myth, industry, community. And the region's geography would reshape itself around your choices. That would be the ultimate recognition of the pattern, giving the player the tools to write their own thesis. But the pattern's most enduring truth is not about predictions. It is about why the Pokémon world remains the gold standard for RPG world building. Other game worlds have sprawling lore, detailed histories, and complex maps. What makes Pokémon different is that every element of a region, its geography, its towns, its music, its Pokémon distribution, its legendary presence, serves a single idea. The region is not a backdrop, it is a statement. When you enter Hoenn, you feel the balance of land and sea in the very layout of the routes. When you climb Mount Coronet, you sense the weight of creation lore in the stone beneath your feet. When you stand in Winden Stadium, you hear the roar of a crowd that has been baked into Galar's identity from the ground up. That coherence is rare. It is cheap to list 1,000 pieces of lore. It is precious to make every route whisper the same story. The hidden pattern has always been a pact between the designers and the players. The designers place the clues. The mountain that mirrors the shape of a legendary. The city built around a fossil excavation. The forest haunted by a ghost type that appears only at night. And the players instinctively feel that something is right. They may not explicitly name the thesis, but they sense that the world is intentional. That is why the pattern matters. It is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a language that speaks directly to the part of us that wants to believe a fictional place is real. And so the legacy of the hidden pattern is not in the regions themselves, but in the millions of hearts that have carried these places into their own lives. Players who remember their first time seeing the silhouette of a legendary in a cave. Players who can hum the Route 101 theme from memory. Players who have walked through Lavender Town with a mixture of melancholy and wonder. Each of those moments is a thread in a tapestry that spans 9 generations and over a quarter of a century. The pattern may change, but the feeling it creates, the sensation of belonging to a world that was built with care, that feeling is its own kind of enduring myth. The next thesis statement for the 10th generation has not yet been written, but the ink is already being prepared. It will be a statement about what Pokémon means now, in this era of open worlds and global connections, and a community that has grown up alongside the franchise. It will honour the pattern while transcending it, and when we finally step into that new region, we will recognise it immediately. Not because we have seen it before, but because the pattern will whisper that we are home. The gold standard is not about perfection. It is about the promise that every new adventure will feel both familiar and new. That is the hidden pattern, and it will continue as long as there are trainers ready to take their first step of a small town into a world that awaits them. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.